Hi, how are ya? Welcome back to my channel. So I've got a lot to go over, and I should just get into this to get it, not to just get it over with, but some of the stuff I want to talk to you doesn't have anything to do with this, I don't think, but it's still important, and so I'll just read this and see where it leads to, if it leads into what I want to talk about. But this is Post 90, The Dangers of Choronzon, published Monday, April 25th, 2016. And this is like from a newspaper from C.S. Russell's ad for the Choronzon Club, circa 1931. See The Unknown God by Martin P. Starr, 2003. Choronzon is a name for the guardian and gateway of the abyss or chaos, rendered as 333 in Hebrew. Cheth Vav Resh Vav Nun Zayin Vav Nun. 333 being the gate of the number grid, or symbolic of the three threes, essentially. Symbolic of the between and beyond the physical manifest of 9, or symbolized in the 333 numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, parsed in a way I mentioned in the previous post, actually. 89, which interpenetrate holonically in the n-dimensional zero, or void, dynamic void, the gateway of manifestation. When this gateway is opened, the microcosm of consciousness is flooded with the onrush of macrocosmic unconscious forces. And unless a center is prepared and able to align, absorb, and integrate the breakthrough experience, the weaker forces will be swept away in the tide of the greater. On the other hand, Choronzon is the gnashing teeth of the hellmouth of chaos, dispersion, and dissolution. Akrasia in Greek, akrasia being the lack of self-control or weakness of will. It is also the ground of materiality. Hence also its relation to the magic square of Saturn, the 3x3 grid. The binding and ordering of all forces in cosmos. 333 will be examined here more thoroughly and in relation to the Kabbalah of 9 chambers as a whole, known as Ait Becker, as a whole, since there is still much confusion as to its symbolism. The name Choronzon appears to have began with John Dee in his diaries from the 16th century and revived by Aleister Crowley in his scrying of the Enochian Ethers, or Enochian Ethers, in 1909. See the 10th Ether called Zax in Liber 418, or 418, The Vision and the Voice. The essential relation of Choronzon with the abyss, the guardian or gatekeeper thereof, connects with the dweller on the threshold or dark unknown within, beyond, in between all and nothing. The triple-headed Cerberus, the hound of hell, in Greek mythology is the guardian of Tartarus, the underworld, and Hades, Satan. So the relation is obvious and connects further with the triple ohm of creation, preservation, and destruction, past, present, and future, and the Kundalini serpent with 3.5 coils, which symbolize the waking, dreaming, deep sleep in Turiya, twilight. And obviously, Orthus comes to mind, being the double-headed dog, which makes me think of just this dual Janus-faced. It's like, I don't know, there's a Thamiel comes to mind, just the twins of God and this duality that is inherent in unity. I kind of explored that in 85. Anyway, it's like everything can get super confusing quick, but the number 3 is itself the symbol of the coil or spring, symbolic of the spiral force of potential created as the offspring of the universal duality. This is the ever-coming one, or crowned and conquering child, Heru Raha, who is comprised of active and passive aspects as Rahur Kuit and Hur Par Krat, respectively, i.e. Horus and Set. Choronzon could be thought of as the nuclear reaction of hypercharged positive and negative polarities in their microcosmic and macrocosmic interfacing between perceptual, subjective, and objective reality. The cosmic dualities uniting in the third charge the conarium or third eye, engendering manifestation. And what comes to mind just with that is the 333 phenomena of waking up, and also kind of the mystery of Jesus, Christ mystery, or not necessarily the mystery of the mystery of Golgotha, as Rudolf Steiner calls it, because it's said that Jesus died like at 3 a.m. The 3 is a huge, obviously the Trinity, etc., is very Christian, but I don't know. It's just there's some even in when like not considered, when Kabbalah and Gematria is not considered, there still seems to be these lingering traces of, you know, numerical synchronicity, if you want to call it that. But the gates of Choronzon, symbolized by the number 333, the sort of interface between cosmos and chaos, and the Kabbalah of 9 chambers, 111 through 999, are the gates of the consciousness continuum itself, mentioned by Kenneth Grant in verse 107 of the Ninth Arch. The windows of the soul. The dangers of Choronzon arise when these seals are tampered with without the proper wisdom and understanding obtained only through psychophysiological strength training. Training is also 333. Let's see, The Training of the Mind by Alan Bennett, which should be the root focus in any occult work. Again, the weakness of will, or akrasia, that is typical of this particular task is the supreme business to be attended to. Otherwise, little will be of subsequent value, or power and assimilation, absorption, or dissolution will be the inevitable result. The egoic microcosm can be dissolved in a number of ways that will not harm the physical vessel, but the auric body of light can also be cracked or shattered in other ways, infested with astral and etheric viri. 333 certainly has a serrated nature to it, almost like shark teeth, which reminds of its Saturnian relation to Binah, the third Sephira. It's funny, this mention of shark teeth, because I actually found this old box my dad has kept in storage for like my whole life. He actually, ironically, when I was uncovering it, the newspaper printing had September 16th, 1991, and that's what it was all packed in. His birthday is September 16th, and I was born 1992. So it's just weird, but it was a megalodon fossil shark tooth, and a bunch of other, like lots of other smaller shark teeth, mako sharks, and then also a sea cow rib. So this whole, like, there's like a, not just ancient, but a not stellar, what is it, nautical theme already, an ancient nautical theme, just synchronistically, or whatever you want to call it, synchronistically with me. And then this timing 90 has its own connections to the star, obviously Zodi, and being the hook, fish hook, obviously nautical, marine, but there's so many different little things. I see the fish hook symbolism almost as an anchor, like the symbolism of the anchor has come up numerous times with the star. The anchor also relating kind of to gravity, the science of gravity, and then X-rays has come to mind. Anyway, the shark teeth being just that little thing being mentioned is crazy because of the timing for me. Which reminds of its Saturnian relation to Binah, the third Sephira. Saturn and his scythe represent the cleaving of the goddess and the tilling of the earth, as well as the cutting of the threads of birth, life, and death, as in the death card of the Thoth deck. And with Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos comes to mind for some reason, the whole three. Hecate is actually 334 in Greek. And so I've always seen that as that at the center of the three ways. The true nature of understanding is hinted at in the fact that it is above the abyss, beyond the phenomenal prism generated through Thoth, identification, or information, knowledge, and Malkuth, ego, i.e. the fallen cube of the Ruach, or psyche soul. That the cube is associated with, again, with Saturn, this barrier, gateway, etc. The fallen cube of the Ruach, or psyche, soul, the hebdomad, or seven-color rays between the abyss and composing manifestation, Malkuth. Choronzon is a figurative guardian of the inner gate. What is that? Yod, Nun, Hey, Resh, Gimel, Aleph, Teth, Hey, inner gate, 333. Maintaining a separation of the higher and lower orders of being, the ring pass not, again, which is triple according to Dion Fortune in the Cosmic Doctrine. It makes me think again of the 360s with the point in the center. That is Tifreth. Sort of atomic symbol comes to mind. The atom symbol. The higher order, which is numinous and pure energetic potential or tendency, utilizes the lower orders as vessels for its embodiment and emanation. Mind over matter. I, dreaming I. 333 being unlock the shell, unlock space, and the number egg, i.e. 0, as the egg. The number egg. The considerations about the funnel effect in Dark Doorway of the Beast, 1992, are extremely important regarding the practical understanding of 333. The fact that he even says that its result will herald another global transformation is concerning, considering that this book has been virtually taken out of circulation, and the topics it discusses, as well as the work of Kenneth Grant, who wrote the foreword to the book, is vehemently feared by the uninitiated, if even at all considered. I'll quote, Magic, Māyā, or manifestation, in its entirety is based upon the operations of the funnel effect. Very often it is said that the astral light is the main component in the armory of the magician. The magician is purely an individual who becomes more introspective by virtue of systematic obsessions and controlled derangement than his contemporaries. But it is a knowledge of the dynamics of the funnel effect that enables him to operate his system controlled by the will. The astral light is purely the nuts and bolts of the system. The image, thought, is the created masterpiece, and the funnel effect is the tools of construction. In enhancing an understanding of the tools, it is possible to create and design any structures and any forms. The funnel effect, of course, happens each time any creature thinks. It accesses its group subconsciousness and its personal conscious. Only sustained and intense saturated introspection allows man to be fully aware of what is happening in mind. It was this sustained concentration that enabled the operation of the funnel effect and the singularly most important factor that caused the initial development of Paleolithic man. A thorough working knowledge of the system of operation of the funnel effect and its results will allow man to truly understand his mental machinery. This will herald another global transformation, instantaneous and similarly proportional to the advance given to Paleolithic man, who played with both mind and image in the recesses of darkness. 333 is the funnel effect funnel itself, as it acts as a primary or a prime point of interface between the map model and the inner or underlying reality beneath and behind the web of the astral thread. Again, each of the Kabbalah of 9 chambers shows the literal Kabbalah, 444, being emanated in both number and language, in such an exquisite way as to act as a mechanism for not only unveiling the natural and unnatural codes of the matrix, but also explaining and giving directions for its application. O, or 0, is the egg of the eye, the container of vision, the shell of the soul, and thus the inner flame. 82, equating with the UFO. 82 is the number of magic, and 333 minus 82 is 251, which I'm going to have to go into later with, I guess it does kind of connect. Because Mary, the whole, as much as I thought of 90 as being related to Jesus because of the star and the symbolism, for different, and the king, Malek, obviously Moloch, but really King Melech, the King of Kings, the water, the bringer of water, etc. As much as I thought of Jesus at first, contemplating 90, more and more Stella Maris, or Mary as the star, and the relationship between Mary as the sea, and just waters, in so many different ways. So 251, Vril being obviously like Uriel, the light of God. There's a lot to this I'm going to have to get into, but anyway. And the Kurla cell, i.e. the astral body, see beyond the Mav zone and break the cycle, both of which indicate the plasmic energy. This relates to the Higgs boson, also 333, which is the quantum excitation of the galactic energy Higgs field said to exist throughout manifestation. 111 or 111 is the white light of the light lattice of the fabric, 222, of the three-dimensional, 333, outer space, 444, of fourth density, 444. The fractals, 555, and the synchronicities, 555, align in the quantum particle, 555, of a quantum universe. 555 is also had in full, He being 10, Aleph 111, and Daleth being 434. Again, like I've mentioned, Hadit has a spelling of 999 when you consider He as 15, or H-E-H. He, Aleph, Daleth, Yod, which is 20, Yod, Vav, Daleth, and then 419, Teth. So Hadit, again, the fullness that he represents is even more fully expressed as 999, which Crowley didn't seem to recognize, nor did he understand it, or not understand, but mention anywhere that Therion with an unfinal is also 999. Anyway, all that's been explained, but it's the compounding of all this that is important. 666 is the key to the abyss, and the number of the evolution from beast to man to Superman. God is not to be evolved into, as God is the goer, the going force already at once attained, omnipresent, and omniform. 666 is the electric solar power of Paradisos, Greek paradise or heaven. The fire from heaven brought down for the witness of man, mentioned in the previous post. Again, this stellar power. The revealed word of the perfect creation of the whole Kabbalah, and particularly this primary key to the chamber, the fullest chamber of the Kabbalah of 9 chambers, each being 666, the Freemasonry of the geometric form within and without the fractal of manifestation. 666 represents the Wissenschaft, a German word whose meaning incorporates science, learning, knowledge, scholarship, and implies that knowledge is a dynamic process discoverable for oneself rather than something that is merely handed down. Again, maybe not brought down, but graced much less bought. 666 literally represents the occult, as it is the formula of not know. But it is also that of nothing hidden. The Masonic secret is that the true word and science of God, Mathesis Theologia, Greek 666, is written in everything, within and about us all, in every way, forever and always. It gets repetitive, but this is the nature of the lightning flash of 777, i.e., counting the values of the path of this, the flaming sword of the tree of life is 777. 777 is the dark doorway of the beast itself, the vortex of Thoth into the world of broken shells, or the Tlaphoth, the world of the Tlaphoth, or Olam HaTlaphoth. Broken shells and Olam HaTlaphoth both being 777. Dark Doorway of the Beast talks about the importance of the lightning flash of astral light, synonymous with consciousness and kundalini at the base of the spine in the Muladhara chakra, or Malkuth, whose symbol is the mark of the beast, or the swastika, usually concealed or congealed. Again, the swastika, 666. Aside from baseless digressions of the inversion of this symbol by the Nazi Schutzstaffel, 666, the swastika, which being the solar gateway of spirit and matter, is mathematically related to the funnel effect and O, as especially the wheel. 666 is the circle itself. 777 being 111 more is key of the circle, key of, or 35 plus 76, 111, i.e. the key that unlocks the egg, which is relevant considering 777 was the formula both of the Encyclopedia of Gematria Codes began by Crowley in Liber 777, really Sefer Sephiroth 500, which is O Arithmos, the numbers, but also unus in omnibus, omnia in uno, one in all in one, the magical motto of Frater Achad as probationer, the one, Achad or unity, who unlocked the key to Liber El Vel Legis and uncovered the mystery of Māyā, with the number of 107 being the number of Bixa, an egg, and oval, the egg key of manifestation. 888, as has been known for quite a while, as Jesus or Isus, the illuminated Messiah, and Messiah in full in Hebrew is also 888. Mem, Shin, Yod, Cheth, who spoke many parables of wisdom for those who can be like serpents but harmless as doves, who had an ear to hear and an eye to see the way out. Ultimate liberation, 888, of the Gnostic demiurge. Again, this reflection, known simply as manifestation. Manifestation has a, I wouldn't say secret spelling, but a veiled spelling. Generally, in its like lowest form, it's 321. Manifestation. I know that it's Shin or Semek replaced with Shin, 561. One of the Teths replaced with Tau, and then the Ayin replaced with Vav, just like Māyā as 107. So it's just kind of a veiled spelling. But not really, because Vav and Ayin do often are often exchanged for each other. By not overly identifying with it, but seeing the supernatural, which is also 888, light within oneself, the only necessary quality needed for entry into the Great White Brotherhood. And that was one I found that could have been inaccurate. Great White. Yeah, it's 5 more, so I screwed up somewhere. That one I found out later on, and it was weird because I was like, I could have swore that's what it was, but the Christ light of 888, or the Azoth using just a tau, or astral light, is the stellar light of the soul itself, the starlight of the soul itself, something which cannot be determined or denied for anyone but itself, as it speaks for itself. The soul should rather be considered not so much as something given or taken, but something built and strengthened or dulled and weakened. The fluid nature, the alchemical nature really, of 888 is reminiscent of the Aquarian water bearer, and it is also the formula of the spell, I will bring down the fire of the heaven, i.e., I will manifest the light. 999 is the supreme knowledge of this light and the key to its full understanding. And so the light really, it makes me think of really what the Sri Yantra veils in the Kamakala Vilasa, which is Sarvananda Māyā, 666, the solar center. 999 is the curse of Choronzon, while O, or 0, silence, is the cure. 333 times 3, or Choronzon manifest in three-dimensionality, invokes the clefothic vibrations and fragmentations from beyond the hypersphere, or toroid, of the consciousness continuum, which can alter the entire perceptual three-dimensional space-time continuum itself altogether. 999 being the key in full, mem, or mefthak essentially, but mem, pe, tau, cheth, unlocks the O, the egg or womb, of Nuit, Hadit, Rahur, Kuit, being also the key of the Eon of Mayat, the Eon of truth and justice, and, as I've duly noted previously, the incoming of the Eon of Mayat, the lesser and greater cycles of the Eon of Mayat, i.e. Frater Achad's first intimations circa 1948. 999 is O Aporedos, the secret that remains to Apaton, or to Eraton, the unspeakable. The Cosmikos Sophia, or cosmic wisdom, that achieves status in the highest chamber with the higher power. This is matched by Therion, non-final, the beast 666, who said, I will make myself like the Most High God, in Isaiah 14:14. O is Ayin, the eye, the keyhole and the key of the eye, the wisdom of the soul. So again, the window, the window, I read that too fast, but the window of the soul. So the eyes as the window of the soul. Again, the Ruach, well, 666 to me represents the Ruach container essentially, but it is also the Periago, or perfection, circle, as well as Brashit Elohim, with beginningness, creation, or God's creation, God's beginning, as well as Pythagoras, which normally has a Samek, but when I replaced Samek with Shin, I realized it was 999. The father of mathematics and numerology equals 999, but this has been veiled by the use of Samek, and it is significant considering 999 is Theos Nestora, the Greek and Hebrew combination being God's secret, or the secret of God, the ageless wisdom of the Kabbalah. Just as Crowley made an alignment in order to bring in the stellar gnosis to man more fully in 1904 and onward, I realized I could never meet his level of subject coverage and output, nor all the other wonderful things he is known to have achieved, mountaineering all he could. I do, however, feel like my Māyā experience is similar in reckoning, perhaps deeper than that even, a continuation. Frater Achad and Kenneth Grant both saw something particularly powerful about certain things in Crowley's work that have failed to fully expand upon, or that they failed to fully expand upon, being short of time, perspective, technology, and foresight. Using the pieces of the puzzle they have left, I have pieced together, at all odds and against much dissuasion, a clearer portrait of the eternal book of nature, as the Rosicrucians called it, Liber Mundi, embedded in the morphogenetic fabric of space-time spirit matter. The books of the stars, see Liber Akbish, or what some term MEST, matter, energy, space-time, which I say, why not STEM, space-time, energy, matter, as it would be a repair and adjustment of the fallen four elemental phases of manifestation: air, water, fire, and earth. Makes me think of the branch too. Jesus being called the branch. The irony behind all this is that no matter how close one gets to the center of the dot, or doth, knowledge, which 474 plus Choronzon, 525. Choronzon with a gimel for C. Rates 999. So always breaks up the unity into utter dispersion. This is the nature of Doth as the 11th zone, 11 being the mirror reflection of unity, the shadow, shell, or simulation, or duplicate. But the mistake is throwing the baby out with the bathwater, or the egg out with the shell, or vice versa, without realizing the whole knowledge factor being, as we all know, the key to power. Knowledge itself is highly related to Ma'at, or Ma'at, the measurer and balancer, in a number of ways, as in effect knowledge is always truth in and of itself in a number of particular ways, historically, as literature, even archaeologically, and ultimately micro and macrocosmically. Knowledge or information can also be false, however, and various pieces of information and media can contain both true and false statements in them. The truest theories have always been able to be tested and proven by others, which that's the general view, I guess, of like science. But to me, that negates a lot of other factors that we know about the natural world. You know, things are not always repeatable based on geometry of where we are in the year, but etc. Anyway, all truth and its shadow is contained in the Akashic egg of Ma'at, the balanced truth and justice of the still waters of unbroken tranquility in the midst of it all. So again, the final hay being that sort of membrane of what we call the now and the idea of the future. Really makes me think of the fourth state, Turiya, and how Abhinavagupta mentions that if you could actually reside there and have that as your like focal point of being, it would be like dream control. And don't quote me, I can't remember where that's at, but I know that it ties in with Kubjika and Mark Dixkowski. When I was studying after and through the Tantra Loka, the Manthana Bhairava Tantram, I believe is where that whole idea stems from. But anyway, the corrosive, nuclear, and acidic nature of Choronzon is attributed to its being a mask for the breaking down of the ego by short-circuiting the reason faculty and providing means to glimpse the inner workings and outer eggshells of the mind-body, meaning limits complex. The human mind can already only perceive fractions or fragments of reality at any time, often replays or rememberings. And the focus of awareness is not only outward through the eyes and other senses of Malkuth, but also inward toward an unknown, omnipresent inner center, Doth, their union being Kether Samadhi. The considerations of the cleaving of the mind or schizophrenia, which parallels many mishaps relevant to the occult path and the unique nature of Choronzon, has been made in Dark Doorway of the Beast at length and should be considered. The chapter Schizophrenia, Past, Present, and Future is quoted at length below. Schizophrenia, Past, Present, and Future. The idea of abnormality is impossible to define from either a personal or a universal standpoint. The relativity of abnormality stems from whichever culture attempts to describe its inherent conditions. Certain behavior patterns accepted by one culture type are considered socially unacceptable by another. For instance, the mental states of deep meditation and trance are certainly regarded as abnormal by the Western culture when viewed as the idiosyncrasies of obscure religious societies. Whereas to the Hindu ascetic or Buddhist monk, they are an accepted and indeed expected part of their racial cultural tradition. The borders of recognized acute schizophrenia are the playground of contemporary magicians and mystics, who, as the spearhead of evolutionary development, are paving the way for the new eon mentality. It is by natural evolutionary change that mankind is able to learn and grow. Changes in evolutionary development have always been thought to occur slowly, organically. Despite this, there are situations where cataclysmic events cause such a disruption to the environment that that entire species are wiped out merely due to their inability to adapt. It was Darwin's belief that evolutionary development was always slow of necessity. However, many recent researchers have demonstrated that in certain cases this principle was not as effective as at first thought. In fact, in contradiction to this, some species have been shown to have mutated very quickly in order to sustain their continued existence. In line with this belief, it is my contention that man's mental evolution is once again at the borders of such an abrupt and unavoidable change. It is hoped that this book may present an attitude of insight into the systems of thought process and thereby provide a basis for the individual to chart the presently unknown territories of his mental machinery and enter into communion with the direction of natural evolution. A key in this puzzle is the increased occurrence of schizophrenia within society, an examination of which yields many important factors and ideas which in themselves are capable of revealing vast tracts of understanding. Without the presence of this abnormal condition, this enhanced understanding would be hidden beneath the strata of normal consciousness. What of the Western European culture and its view of the conditions symptomatic of schizophrenia? Greek schizine, or schizine, to cleave and phren, the mind. Again, ha phren, or eta phren in Greek sits at 6. There is a wealth of knowledge on the subject from literally hundreds of sources. Much of it is nebulous and contradictory in nature. In order to begin to clear the shambles that surrounds the subject, it should therefore simply be assumed that the conditions surrounding schizophrenia are many and varied, and that much of an unexplained nature has been bundled into the generic terminology of the split mind. The undisturbed core of this maelstrom of opinion seems to concentrate on the following as being typically characteristic. The schizophrenic, 1, indulges in asocial behavior and brooding. 2, becomes apathetic and indifferent, often morbidly suspicious. 3, retires from the real world. 4, creates an entirely new world for himself. 5, often lives in squalor. 6, sometimes succumbs to petty crime and often wanders in fugue states. 7, often has a horror vacui, a fear of empty spaces. See the chapter The Dark Doorway of the Beast and its relevance to horror vacui and panic. In addition to this, influencing factors upon the situation may include uncontrollable outbursts of temper whose unbalanced fervor takes an inordinately long period of time to return to equilibrium. Also, there is often a history of solitariness, which is particularly relevant if traced back to childhood. Even widespread detractors and squabblers do seem to display consistency of opinion on the above mentioned as being naturally inherent tendencies in the schizophrenic individual. The foregoing seems to suggest, particularly with respect to the behavioral aspects, that there is an absence of a conscious control factor in those persons of a schizophrenic nature. Again, acrasia, the weakness of will, 333, comes to mind. This latter element, that of the conscious control veto, is mentioned throughout this book. The pious Christian may talk of conscience, morality, and guilt as the guide to eventual action or non-action, but the control factor mentioned here is not that which is the judge of whether persons do or don't. This control factor, the Dātian veto, is the faculty of the mind that is at the source of all thought and is above and beyond all conscious consideration. The division of opinions on the characteristics inherent in schizophrenic patients is also taken to include organic psychosis, where there are changes in the cellular structure of the brain or body illness, and functional psychosis, which exists without a known organic cause. Such organic effects may be the result of functional causes and indeed vice versa. From an occult point of view, man is considered a psychosomatic complex. Psychosomatic is 666, namely of the mind and the body, a symbiotic process. So just as Hafren, which is the mind, is 666, psychosomatic is 666. I've already mentioned in post 86 the various relations to the body again. Where was I? So this dissolves the need for such classification within this work. It is this outdated concept of the division of mind and body that has the effect of a brake upon the progressional advancement of man's knowledge of himself. So this concept of schizophrenia, cleaving, cutting into, Choronzon as the gateway, all kind of implies a, if not just duality, a fracturing, a fragmentation. Initially, schizophrenia was known as dementia praecox, literally early from the mind. This suggests that schizophrenia is a removal of awareness from the realities of everyday living. The main symptom from scientific observation shows that the most vital aspect contributing to schizophrenia is a seemingly totally illogical pattern of thought. Apparently disconnected fragments of partial images assembled in a merely haphazard fashion, which are then projected without linearity into the mind's eye. Again, the O as the womb of thought. Such incoherencies in schizophrenic individuals have often left a bewildered audience. It is because of this that such persons exhibiting unexpected, spontaneous, and uncontrollable characteristics are often suspect of schizophrenic tendencies. It is to this social and cultural judgment that this treatise will apply. However, it must be remembered that schizophrenia, like all things, exists in varying degrees. For the purposes of everyday living and the pursuance of career prospects, it is not a desirable state in which to be encapsulated. But, like all things, a knowledge of a certain degree of schizophrenic derangement donates ideas and knowledge particularly relevant to those seekers who would venture into the darkness of the self. It will be noted that, far from being rare, schizophrenia is extremely widespread. And far from being undesirable, it is, to a certain extent in many cases, both desirable and extremely useful. The stages that herald the progressive disintegration of the schizophrenic personality are often easily recognized in the pictorial evidence of paintings, which is a therapy often thrust upon the patients of psychiatric hospitals. Evidence of schizophrenia may feature in such paintings as severely distorted or partially removed body parts. The dismembering aspect of the goddess Kali. Such images are almost suggesting that the reality of the artist has altered, become distorted. Often the pictorial evidence also shows fragmentation and deteriorating linearity. Also often depicted are symbols which appear to have no direct connection with their surrounding environment. Those images which are not from associative grouping within the mind, This suggests that the schizophrenic has lost his way and cannot linearize and connect a sequential order of events. The particular relevance of such iconography is only normally apparent, and indeed relevant to the creator, whose method of expression seems entwined with the constant reference to and the usage of private symbology. This is not a situation altogether distant from the attitude adopted by many of today's contemporary magicians and seekers after occult knowledge. In fact, it has often become a traditional pattern that the occultists should adopt some totem or symbol as representative of his inner self, an extension from the core of being to the linearity of the outside world, as it were. The use of such adopted icons is often used as a key or point of reference to which the construction of the personality is referred, and ultimately reconstructed during a continuous learning process. Even the simplest notion of adopting a magical name is yet another analogous act, which is nearly always the requirement of the newly accepted sibling of magical fraternities and mystery schools. Francis Reitman, in the book Insanity, Art and Culture, 1954, Francis Reitman has suggested that children initially think in terms of verbal symbols, but as learning and age increase, this gives way to the use of schematic and conceptual symbols. My own researches lead to the belief that the schizophrenic appears to undergo a reversal in this respect. That is, the verbal deteriorates to the appreciation of the visual, as if somehow the visual becomes more readily accessible. Perhaps the withdrawal of the schizophrenic from social intercourse stultifies vocalization to the point of atrophy, whereupon the imagery function becomes the predominant factor. The resultant is the symbolic images that verge on the abstract and surreal. Such paintings, however, bring us very close to the images that we perceive in the occult art of today. This contemporary fascination appears to be centering around the results of atavistic resurgences. The works of Kenneth Grant and Austin Osman Spare offer a full explanation of this system. See the bibliography. Which are, more often than not, totally without recognizable form. Such unreal images only serve to exacerbate the thought that the artist is capable of leaving the state of normality and reaching or substituting an alternative method of mental perception by systematic methods of intentional derangement. An alternative to the preceding is that the state is equally coexistent with the day-to-day personality, as is beyond the conscious control of the individual who continually drifts from one condition to the other. Whichever is considered, whichever is thought to have the greater validity, is of no real benefit to the direction of this dissertation. The condition exists, that is all. However, let it be said that this is no new phenomena by any means. It is necessary to refer to the surrealist abstract painters to see that schizophrenic artistic creations have in fact been produced for years. The most important viewpoint to hold is that such creative abstractions from the surrealist point of view are realized in the absence of control by the conscious mind. The surrealists' first manifesto of 1924 defines surrealism as pure psychic automatism, by which an attempt is made to express, either verbally, in writing, or in any other way, the true functioning of thought, the dictation by thought in the absence of all control by the reason, excluding any aesthetic or moral preoccupation. It is the link between the linear and non-linear worlds that we must become aware of, in order to fully integrate our mentality into the changes that compose the new eon consciousness. The reference is to that period that exhibits the greatest occurrence of schizophrenia. This time is now and is inescapably bound into Thelema in the age of Horus. For by doing so, it is possible under controlled conditions to unlock the doorway of darkness that comprises the access port to the corridors of the mind. It should come as no great surprise to learn that it is the abreaction of the capacity for logical reasoning within the schizophrenic that causes the production of such abstract creations. The creative visualization of mental imagery is the building block of any artist. It is the lack of consciously functioning reason during construction of the final image that creates the apparent disconnected and obscure end products that society considers as an abnormality. As Goya put it, the sleep of reason produces monsters. The confusion of such evidence firmly leads to the expression that the true artistic expression takes place in the absence of control. For in the automatic state that exists in the absence of the control by the ego, it is possible to glimpse the cogs and wheels of the universe, which are otherwise neglected by the mind, simply because visualization of this machinery is not considered necessary to maintain day-to-day survival. Such introspective analysis has always been the stamping ground of intellectuals, artists, poets, who, in shedding the outer veils of materialism, can eventually begin to perceive the inner core of self. In doing so, however, the faculties of materialistic acquisition atrophy, and it is often the case that the true artist and creator is indeed a hungry man. Such a person was Austin Osman Spare, respected and renowned magician, sorcerer, and artist, who advocated methods of automatic drawing. Examples of his work range from breathtaking beauty to confusing indeterminacy. On observing many examples of his work, the transition between the functioning of reasoning via conscious control and the abandonment of the latter is unerringly obvious, as lucid form and random indeterminacy are traced across the pages of his work. As lucid form and random indeterminacy are traced across the pages of his works. Such an example of this fluctuating reasoning and control is his Stealing the Fire from Heaven, taken from the Book of Pleasure and illustrated in Plate 1. As we are, therefore, apparently being faced with an increasing range of abstracted occult art and ideas, it is very tempting to draw a parallel analogy with many aspects of these in the schizophrenic outlook. Outlook being 666. This, to some, offensive and pedantic statement is only considered as such by those unaffected by acculturation, who regard schizophrenia as abnormality. It has already been stated that such abnormalities are an idea wholly relative to the cultural and indeed subcultural viewpoint, and therefore should be easily acceptable within the passage of time. If it was to be said that schizophrenic mentality was a natural and evolutionary development, many would express counter-opinions based on the observation that stability is a function of solidity and apparent change dominates a departure from it. But the key in this is the concept of apparent change. The only immediately recognizable difference between revolution and evolution is the relativity of the time scales involved. It is futile to say that the mind apparatus of man has been unchanged in its acceptance of reality and linearity for n years, and is therefore stable and normal. The sample that can be used for comparison is so very small. Man has existed on Earth form many times n years. So, what good is referral to such a minuscule time datum as contemporary historical knowledge in order to define normality? Whether the existence of the increasing occurrence of schizophrenia is due to slow organic development of the race as a whole, or the ministrations of some outside element impinging upon our circumstances, causing radical and unexpected change in only the most sensitive of individuals, is yet another unsolved mystery. The only currently useful information as a byproduct of the analysis of the situation by the established hierarchy of professionals is limited to schizophrenic attitudes are becoming more abundantly obvious in current lifestyles. This is most certainly not progress or a useful attitude. It neglects the true cause of and the important influences that the schizophrenic holds for future development. In order to attempt to at least understand the motivational impulse that drives the machinery of increasing schizophrenia within the race as a whole, it becomes necessary to analyze the artistic productions of the men of vision. Perhaps one of the most notable components of this strange art are the geometric forms that exist in the paintings of schizophrenics. These are often repeated and exhibit bilateral symmetry. These are most often the last forms to disappear in acute schizophrenia. Compare the relevance of such forms with those mentioned in the chapter Seizing the Image and its relevance to entopic forms. It is as if they are the last threads, the last link with the outside world of possible expression, whose absolute rigidity and permanence at the basis of the mental structure retains them until the last layer of the ego is peeled away. The classic myth portraying the image of Theseus following the thread of Ariadne in order to escape from the labyrinth is perhaps an apt image to consider here. For if the geometric or entopic form is the last totem of the path on entering the underworld or unconscious, then conversely it must be the first path trodden on the way out. Typified by the Minotaur beast in the maze of the labyrinth. Again, Minotaur is 777, and Daedalus, the builder of the labyrinth, is 111. This pathway is the route towards the concrete mentation of everyday life and conceptual reality, defined and constructed as valid by the existence of the conscious constructional capacity of the mind. Schizophrenic paintings often display part human, part animal creatures, whose relative sizes and shapes are not referred to the same datum of scale. Often these zoomorphic forms have a multiplicity of heads and limbs, or perhaps just the latter in the absence of the torso. In other words, the image has been viewed in a disconnected manner. Samples of areas of the whole become visible to the mind's eye, but the artist has not been capable of reassembling the disconnected parts into a composite unit of proportional and acceptable scale. It is as if the artist has been able to travel to parts unknown, but has either not had the capacity to observe the whole of the astral landscape during the excursion, or was not able to sensibly compile the parts retrospectively upon return to normality. In either case, a salient factor appears to be the lack of an ability to associate disconnected items and to reassemble the pieces. There is a certain trans-dimensional element breathing within this, as if the component of collectivity is missing. This is extremely significant in light of today's occult art. The above description is certainly very representative of many of the examples available. Another concept to consider in disconnected and fragmented images is the occurrence of the dream state. One particular occult fraternity, the Esoteric Order of Dagon, otherwise abbreviated the EOD, utilizes a method of dreaming, amongst others, to access the areas of the underworld and recover hidden treasures from the Antipodean fount. One particular recurring image of dreams enshrined in consequent artistic form to come from the resulting practices of this fraternity often shows a one-eyed cephalopod referred to as Cthulhu. Cephalopods are also a very often used icon in examples of schizophrenic art. In Lovecraftian parlance, the current director of the Esoteric Order of Dagon states that the dream school of the Esoteric Order of Dagon can be found only through personal dream work. Members can experience contacts and relationships with various definite persona and entities in many specific, often recurring astral locations. In In particular, imaginary cities are often visited in dreams, wherein are found remarkable artifacts and books. With continued reconnaissance, sometimes in a series of connected dream workings, these objects can be remembered and upon waking recreated in physical actuality. The Miskatonic University, with its library of arcane grimoires, the Nameless City with its hieroglyphic wall decorations, the Plateau of Lang's prehistoric temple, and the Mountains of Madness, a realm of primal nightmares, as well as other places, can be found by careful, experienced dreamers. Dream or nightmare workings may involve the temporary dissociation of the senses in order to stimulate astral right brain perception. This is achieved by various methods similar in nature to Dali's paranoiac critical technique. Compare this to the concepts of abstract forms, schizophrenia, and Doth mentioned throughout this book. Presumably, the collation of resultant data from dreaming the mythos exhibits much ennui on imagery, both in terms of written and artistic interpretation. This is very much like the intrusive perichoresis of fictional and non-fictional elements discussed in the chapter The Ingression of Alien Forces. This begs the question, are present-day occult drawings and concepts not inherently pathological, or just beyond or other than the accepted normal? It would seem, at least, that ideas are turning towards Eastern ideals where pictorial evidence shows not what the authors saw, but what they knew, or more correctly, what they believed. As the Eastern belief does not separate mind from body and environment as do Westerners, the whole culture allows for the introduction and usage of the otherwise odd images that are utilized in temple sculptures and in the theater of the shadow screen plays. A cultural component of Eastern systems of belief, a method of communicating dogma by means of a fine screen representing the thin divide between the worlds. The stories that contain the knowledge are enacted by puppets behind the screen, thus producing the shadow effect. This is because Western minds have a tendency to linear forms, with a beginning and an end, whereas the Eastern mind seems to be always more concerned with the concept of cycles of infinity and eternal progression. If contemporary scholars were able to describe the method of the thought process from inspiration through idea to selection of image, vast tracts of undiscovered territories could be exploited in search of personal illumination. The revelation of the method of this process is the supreme secret of all magic. It dissolves the need for ritual and all other tedious and involved peripheral operations of a similar nature. An understanding of the process of thought generation explains the reasons for the occurrences of specific thoughts. We are what we think. To understand one reveals the other. The key to the door of the universe is readily available for those who know how to apply it. The illusion is to Doth. If it became possible through determined effort to ably utilize the still obscure and esoteric constructional process of thought and reveal the dynamics of mind operation, it would also become clear why schizophrenic imagery arises. The schizophrenic, in losing the capacity for formative construction, acquires the faculty of collecting sample images that do not automatically collate and combine into linear structures. This lack of an ability to construct is natural, and yet it is the quality desired by the potential abstract artist or intuitional creative writer. They require the ability to slew the automatic process of non-selective construction of mind images. Many methods of derangement have been utilized in an attempt to synthesize this effect. The taking of narcotics or the usage of such substances as ether or nitrous oxide have enabled the paralysis of lower, more concrete and linear assembling portions of the consciousness, thereby allowing attention to become centered on the higher, more tenuous levels. That's what low doses of mushrooms made me think, is that it reveals like mental processes that you're generally completely unaware of because they're so subtle. The mind may have only one point of focus at any time. If paralysis of the lower function of mind is obtained, then the point of focus, or awareness datum, is shifted automatically, in this case, upwards. The schizophrenic is actually capable of raising the level of his awareness above the confines of everyday waking consciousness, and thereby see thought at a higher, more primary, abstract stage than the majority of normally thinking people. The paradox, however, is that in a surreal world above the normal functioning of conscious veto, images may only be glimpsed during the moment of their inception. Any attempt by the mind to actually manipulate, even to the smallest degree, involves the faculty of, but not necessarily full, conscious reasoning. The result of this process is to snap back into the mundane mentality, fall to the more corporeal zones, and consequently to abandon the temporary theater play of the icons in the surreal realms. The situation is like that of the yogin, who in meditating is suddenly aware of a bump or shock traveling through the body. The instance of this realization donates the state of full waking consciousness, and he realizes that suddenly, from a state of vacuity, he has become aware and is incapable of remembering his immediately previous thoughts, images, and daydreams. The reason, of course, is because in not formulating the images at a corporeal and densely conscious level, it is not as readily accessible from the astral light. Placement of images into the astral light for subsequent recovery as memories is only effected when the energy or force is translated into full form. If the awareness level is above the zone of formation of the image, then no memories, or at best, fragmented and incomplete portions, will be all that exists. And this seems to be what DMT made, like it makes me think of DMT and how time seems to be dissolved, but then as soon as you start beginning to, first of all, feel comfortable in a breakthrough, thoughts start coming. You start coming back to what we call reality, but it seems like that's what it does. It, like when I did it one time after studying the Kabbalah for a while, the understanding of Doth as the veil was very clear to me. And like DMT, even though it's 444 and Doth is 474, I saw them as like very related, as well as Daleth, the door. I felt like I needed to close my bedroom door, and then I felt way better, even though rationally it's irrelevant, but like, I don't know, I just saw the significance of the door. I don't know, just these layers of mind and whatnot. It's what it makes me think of. Anyway, this also explains why dreams recalled early in the morning evaporate all too easily, and in most cases float beyond the reach of memory recall. It is this condition of vacuity that neophytes often confuse with falling asleep. An exacerbated form of this attitude is evident in the mystic who realizes the situation of forgetfulness during the meditation and attempts to prevent the loss of awareness in order that he may retain his conscious knowledge and be aware of the experience of cosmic bliss. That is his rightful reward. The consequence of this action, however, prevents the everyday functional awareness from being slewed in favor of the enlightened state. Aleister Crowley quite succinctly describes the elements of this comedy in Liber 65, chapter 1, verse 56. And Adonai said, the strong brown reaper swept his swathe and rejoiced. The wise man counted his muscles and pondered and understood not and was sad. Reap thou and rejoice. Without question, there is severe difficulty in the task of accessing the twisted and tortured pathways that delineate the labyrinth of mind. For it would appear that in the primary stages of investigation into the operation of mental processes, one is either in or out of waking consciousness and never in between. A nice dualist concept. The horror in this situation is that it is this in-betweenness, called by the term space marks in Aleister Crowley's Liber AL Veligus, that is the key to the selection of thought. See the works of Austin Osman Spare for a full and comprehensive understanding of this terminology. As such, it is the gateway to the entire panorama of the thinking and selective action of mind and brain. Therefore, it will always be difficult to understand the operations that occur in the thinking process. The way is always shrouded in darkness, and only repeated journeys will give an instinctive appreciation of the landscape by virtue of the act of repetition. Rather like fumbling in the dark until confident enough to walk boldly, having learnt the necessary geography instinctively. Such a formula is necessary. Repeated usage leads to the process becoming familiar and then completely automatic. Then the conscious input that acts as a guide along the route is limited and in fact slewed, with the result that the individual is more able to relax in his environmental introspection. He is capable of viewing his surroundings without having to concentrate upon the method of this travel, as the route can be followed automatically, effortlessly and without conscious intervention. Again, compare this to the theorems of Gurdjieff, whose complete absorption with conscious control to the detriment of robotic, automatic functions, again, mechanicalness, prevented him from driving a motor vehicle in anything less than a haphazardly inept manner. The resultant being that every once in a while awareness will well up and intrude into the vortex of the conscious zone as apparently virginal thought, as if from nowhere, devoid of all associations. It is almost the acquisition of something from nothing. The reality of the situation is that ideas are produced from the dark room of the mind without the instigation of conscious control. It is widely thought impossible to obtain something from nothing. The crystallization process of thought occurs beyond control. It is only later, when the energy courses its way toward the lower vehicles, that it is possible to veto its emergence into the light of day. See the chapter Inertia, the Energy from Beyond the Abyss, for references to Thoth as the Sephira that unleashes the energy from beyond the human psyche. But it is the lack of illumination during the process of thought formation that prevents us from being cognizant of the thought process. Again, cognition comes mind. The mind being undefined and limitless exhibits itself to causal inspection as infinite and thus devoid of form. From the foregoing, it is possible to see that the mystic schizophrenic link is open to scrutiny. Many contemporary magicians seem to wallow in this twilight world without achieving any productive results. And yet, almost all practical magicians use some form of derangement in order to explore the depths of their pools of consciousness. One source of thought propounding the reasons for the arrival of this schizophrenic New Age mentation is the concept of the introduction of the Aeon of Horus by the auspices of the mage Aleister Crowley. The crowned and conquering child see the chapter on thelema. There are many works available on Crowley which deal succinctly with his life, ambitions, and achievements. As far as he was concerned, probably the most important event in his career was the reception of the manuscript Liber AL Vel Legis, the Book of the Law. Liber 220, often abbreviated in occult manuscripts as AL, pronounced L. This was obtained via a magical opus, or work, involving the ministrations of an entity known as Aiwass. The content of the document announces the ushering in of a new eon said to have begun in 1904, an eon to be baptized with blood. Certainly, the two world wars may lend a semblance to credence to this concept, especially considering, amongst other minor accolades, Horus was regarded as the Egyptian god of war. The Scandinavian equivalent is that of Thor, the Roman Mars, and the Indian Vishnu. Vishnu, for instance, is described as the centripetal energy by which all things exist. He is not concerned with their outward form. The Vishnu principle is identified with the world of dream. This echoes very clearly the borders of schizophrenia. That indeterminate dead band where the acceptable and unacceptable mingle in a cacophony of aberrant existence. The compelling idea here is that Horus is representative of pure energy, blind force, without visage, thus without form. A key to much is the association of the Eon of Horus with schizophrenia, with the mark of the beast, again the swastika, and with the veto of Thoth. It is the epicenter of the Eonic mystery and the vision of power. As such, the preponderance of force over that of form becomes apparent, for diminishing form gives way to symptomatic schizophrenia, as demonstrated earlier. Cited here is the case of a saturation experiment by a contemporary magician. This utilizes systematic derangement by saturated identification with the Egyptian god Horus as a totem in an opus involving total involvement with the god form over a period of many months. After the banishing and purification rituals were duly performed, I progressed to visualizing the force of Horus as an energy which I could grasp and bring down into my body. I also utilized my visual imagination to superimpose the body of the god onto my own. Using a technique of breath control whilst firmly holding the desired image, I attempted to exhaust the body by repeatedly performing the process. Hopefully, in this way, I would be able to bridge the gap between the conscious and subconscious spheres and leave a seed of intention, a glyph of recognition that I may use as a method of tapping the energy embodied in the Horus zoomorph. At the end of a 2-month period of intense saturation with the Horus god form, I found that contrary to obtaining any useful results of noteworthiness, I had lost entirely the capacity to analyze my experiences or even to recover any spoils of the process. I had become hopelessly inept at intellectualization and furthermore found that I was even incapable of supplying the impetus necessary to continue the experiment. On reviewing my records, I was disgusted at the total apathy and inertia that I found. It was only months afterward that on recovery I was able to piece the situation together. I had until then been unaware of the allied symptoms of schizophrenia, but it was immediately apparent to me that my lack of articulation coupled with other aspects had many parallels with such a diagnosis. My capacity to write, read, converse, analyze, and socialize generally had deteriorated alarmingly. I wanted and very much needed to do something as I was driven by a blind impulse to create. The lack of form provided no vessel for me in which to encapsulate and hence abstract or abreact the energy that was compelling me to act. I acted spontaneously and without forethought and directly as a function of my immediate situation. In the early stages of the condition, this was most alarming as I was thrust into an area unbeknown to me. Or unbeknownst? I don't know. I know there are typos because I hand typed this, but he also used his own words in some places. But I had always been careful and calculating in respect of decision and action. Divergence from this had always endowed me with a sense of detachment. But this was certainly not the case now. I was totally, utterly, completely uncaring and unconcerned about the direction of my life, or about the direction my life was about to take. In actual fact, I had managed to dissolve the conceptual fear of the future. I had achieved a certain quality of spontaneity. Research on this subject shows that Horus is associated with blind force, raw energy in the absence of reason, restraint, or indeed conscious intervention. The main resultant characteristic of this type of obsessional derangement is often formulated as schizophrenia, crudely referred to as force in the absence of form. These rituals are useless to one who has discerned and attained the mark of the beast. Essentially, you could consider knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. It is this single knowledge that guides the mind to its various theater plays. To concentrate upon the ritual and its end product is to limit experience to the products of the investigation. It must be remarked that such a freedom from the expected and normally socially acceptable course of direction that each of us is normally carried in is rare, truly frightening, and yet capable of immense achievements. Once the persona of the majority character that indwells us is broken apart, see references throughout this book to Kali, and in particularly the chapter Tantra, A Personal Approach, it is possible to see that we are all only a collage of morsels of experience, and that we have acquired these from various sources during our own journey through life. The dissolution of these character traits leads to unexpected responses from the individual. It is the outside observer that classifies abnormality. It is well to remember that being sick only means that we are in possession of something that the majority does not have. Sick, 333. Surely this implies that if the observer is incapable of understanding the natural thought processes acutely, his diagnosis of possible schizophrenia and consideration that its state is an undesirable illness is only an eidolon of his own ineptitude in perception and understanding. All of the symptoms of schizophrenic indulgence may be present in the exterior of those involved with Tantra Shastra. The liberation attained via Tantra may well be representative of a dissolution of all previous character traits. Abnormality and illness are, as we have seen, referred to specific cultural datums. The associations with schizophrenia, Tantra, and New Eon mentation are further explored in the chapter Tantra, A Personal Approach. The shaman of primitive tribes is almost always in possession of strange powers or tendencies, perhaps being epileptic, nervous, schizophrenic, or transvestite. In some way, he is different from the normality of the surrounding culture. It is this abnormality that the tribe recognizes as a path to enhancement of the entire social system. For they believe that the odd appearance and manners of the shaman demonstrates his exaggerated capacity to enter other worlds, where communion with the gods is evident. The transvestite aspect is evidence of the preoccupation of the individual with womanly attitudes. I don't know, I think there's probably more to that. But these include a better rapport with form and intuition and are thus evidence of the shaman's qualifications for intuitional prescience and divinatory knowledge. The Hindus also created a class of men devoted to the pursuit of knowledge, known as Brahmins, devoted to the pursuit of knowledge and natural phenomena in order to construct a core of invulnerability which would preserve the continuance of the species, based upon unshakable foundations. It became necessary to free this class of man from the toil of everyday living, for such preoccupations would interfere with the natural direction of the mental faculties and detract concentration from those higher aspects so much desired. That such Brahmins and holy men employed obscure methods of asceticism as aids to learning is evident from the wealth of information available. Only in the so-called civilized world are such abnormal traits considered totally unacceptable. The resurgence of schizophrenia within contemporary mind stuff must be understood as the outward manifestation of a method of attainment. It is the byproduct of the ways to learning the functional methods of the mind and the systems of planetary evolution. If we are to condemn the modern shaman out of hand, simply because he does not comply with the normality of the so-called civilized world, then no progress beyond the pathetic level of our mental functioning will be made at this time. Is schizophrenia, then, to be considered as an abnormality of nature, classified as a mental disorder and a disease? Alternatively, it could be said that schizophrenia is in fact a considerably powerful factor in the mentation of the new eon. This is not truly correct, but a thorough understanding of the systems of image creation and the method of thought generation is realized by a modicum of personal experience of schizophrenic mental activity. Today's schizophrenic is the harbinger of tomorrow's thought child. Studying the schizophrenic thought impulse structure teaches much about the association and grouping of thoughts, referred to as associative grouping. Whether these are recognized in mind as words or icons is of no importance here. What is important, however, is the relationship between subsequent ideas which arise within the mind. And basically, like this whole associative grouping, it seems that numbers and the fact that things follow some sort of pattern, like I don't know how else to describe it other than really like referencing the Hindu Dhāraṇī and Sphota concepts. There seems to be a subconscious parsing or mathematics to language that seems to kind of give this credence. It's just that it's been so ignored and suppressed. I don't know, even all the associations of prime numbers, especially figurate numbers with the meanings of like the known meanings in Hebrew, Greek, etc., just shows that there is something to force and form. It's very difficult to wrap our minds around because of how thought and the impulses of thought seem to shape, like it's like the observer effect, essentially. I don't know. It's very difficult to try to just pinpoint, but like anything that is studied, the mind appears to become far more complex and involved as greater attention is paid to it. One difficulty in this respect, unfortunately, is that when a state of self-study is entered, the parameters of the surrounding system appear to change. The change is because of the grouping of associated thoughts that are collected and reserved in the mind. I don't know if he meant to have that sentence go on, but if the student is not very bright or does not have the ability to even consider that one man's meat is another man's poison, the schizophrenic, having shattered the mental framework that was built for him since birth, has gained the capacity for creativity. This creativity is no more than having the experience of associating various instances of thought, action, etc., in a different format to normal man. The normal man, not having created an exact introspective file upon himself, has no way of knowing how he thinks. Even less, he has no idea of how thoughts arise. Like most things that are not normal, schizophrenia is considered as an unacceptable abnormality in the cultural background of our society. Again, I assert that we are only ill when we exhibit that which is not shared by the majority. It could be said that the apathetic, non-caring schizophrenic, having sloughed off the conditioned morality and social dogma of his peers, exhibits to a greater extent a more sovereign attitude than they. To insist that the total disregard for well-being exhibited by such persons is ridiculous. The contempt for their welfare only posits the theory that the established hierarchy knows best. It is this total and utter refuting of the possibility of errors of judgment by the latter that demonstrates a total contradiction to the laws of evolution. It may seem too much of a contradiction to contemporary culture to say that it is time to stop thinking in an outdated, conditioned, and formal manner, and to begin thinking creatively and with spontaneous reaction to environment. This seems to be an exhortation to schizophrenia, and as such, of course, will be considered inimical to acceptability. The destruction of conditioned thinking with its impotent creations is paving the way for the new eon mentation. The astounding capacity of the mental machine is being unveiled by those who have the courage to rush into the chaotic realms of the mind. The appearance of schizophrenic attitudes are only the outward manifestation of the shadows cast by the creation matrix of a new thought generation. The unfolding of this mystery will lead man to understand himself and realize his full potential, but only via the implementation of the will. So again, it makes me think of just what I think of regarding AI and transhumanism, which I've mentioned going as far back as the factors of balance, enemy number one. Just this idea of like this reliance, this, I don't know how to explain it. It's almost like scientism, a religious acceptance, and like, I don't know, it's just the parallel. And I saw it years ago, and just the way that people who would promote some of these ideas didn't see their own hypocrisy, and I don't know. There's definitely that's like the duality of 666. There's this hollow shell nature to it. Parasites come to mind, like the automaton. I don't remember. Yeah, the automaton, the Hanson robots, all these different simulacra of what 666 as the solar center represents, the magnetic energy center. Schizophrenia may also be unintentionally engendered by magicians and mystics alike who believe that they are sufficiently protected from harm. Raising the consciousness to higher levels for the purposes of investigation seems harmless enough, but much may happen before a safe return is accomplished. Such dangers may be found in the performance of the rituals mentioned earlier, and particularly the system delineated in the book Liber V. Vel Reduli, or Reduli by Alastruey. Floating towards the amniotic state of chaos may radically alter the association of mental links as the level of perception, the ego, and the datum of reference are raised to new zones. Results remain unnoticed until after the returning to the banality of everyday consciousness. Very often, such a situation causes the seeker to wander in a world whose parameters no longer have any fixed geography. For as the dissolution of the matrix of the lower vehicles have already begun, in the so-called destructive phases of this experience, severe mental disorientation is experienced. There is no longer a comforting ease of familiarity into which it is possible to relax. The whole of the surrounding environment is new. At this stage, it is not possible to understand that this occurrence is not dark and destructive without being bright and creatively beautiful. But such a situation is indeed enviable, as it is here that the true potential of the individual is unmasked. See the references to Tantra and Kali throughout this work. So again, the panic aspect in its relation to panorama, the vision of Pan. The lack of observed reasoning associated with this only serves to demonstrate that the destruction of the false and non-organic belief thrust upon the individual since birth has begun. This release paves the way for new attitudes full of life and vigor that are created by the element of spontaneous thought. This is the beginning of a journey of investigation into the abandonment of reason and conscious control in favor of direct action. The action is that of spontaneous activity, and the understanding of its principle is of immense relevance to other facets of the Aeonic mystery. Namely, the thelemic expression, do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law, and love is the law, love under will. So that makes me think kind of this whole spark, what I was going to say about Mary, but this goes on just a little more. An excerpt from pages 92 through 93 of A True and Faithful Relation of What Passed for Many Years Between Dr. John Dee and Some Spirits by Marek Kasaban, 1659, not only mentions Choronzon in its simplified Coronzon, which using Vav in Hebrew is where it gets the 333 value, but also the application of number to letter, why it is important as showing the substance, and that in this mathematical way is truer to the language of the angels of God, i.e. the powers of manifestation. So quoting, or just transliterating, or whatever you want to say. Edward Kelly, why join you numbers with these letters, and added none with those of the former table? Brother, what is the cause that all the world is made by numbers? The numbers we speak of are of reason and form, and not of merchants. I beseech you, as concerning the powder whereof he thinketh he hath made due essay of it, as if it should have been the philosopher's stone, and so affirmed to be by the minister of this action. I beseech you so to answer the thing as his reason may be satisfied. They gave no answer hereunto, but proceed in the former matter of numbers. Gabriel, every letter signifieth the member of the substance whereof it speaketh. Every word signifieth quiddity of the substance. The letters are separated and in confusion, and therefore are by numbers gathered together, which also gathered signify a number. For as every greater containeth his lesser, so are the secret and unknown forms of things knit up in their parents, where, being known in number, they are easily distinguished, so that herein we teach places to be numbered, letters to be elected from the numbered, and proper words from the letters, signifying substantially the thing that is spoken of in the center of his creator, whereby even as the mind of man moved at an ordered speech, and is easily pervaded in things that are true, so are the creatures of God stirred up in themselves, when they hear the words wherewithal they were nursed and brought forth. For nothing moveth that is not persuaded, neither can anything be persuaded that is unknown. The creatures of God understand you not. You are not of their cities. you are become enemies, because you are separated from him that governeth the city by ignorance. Actually, I recently realized I lost my book, The City of God, because I looked everywhere for it. So I had to go back and look, and luckily I found a box I had taped, and I found The City of God with a bunch of other theological books, I guess. But it was just weird because I just want to relate this current and this post synchronicity regarding books, because it seems like it happens. I mean, it does happen regardless, but with these posts in particular, and they are guiding factors. But somehow Mary came up into relation to this. I could have swore it was okay, so well, there is some relation. Maybe I'll come to it because it was not apparent at first. Okay, so but this was what started something that recently caused me to, it circled to Mary. So I came across these books at Half Price Books that I overlooked for months, but then something told me to get them while I could. Before someone else did, I'd regret it. But it's called The Blessed Virgin Mary by Gregory Alastruey. St. Augustine, who gallantly opposed Pelagianism and defended the dogma of the propagation of original sin, though he does not assert the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin in express words, nevertheless asserts that some singular privilege with regard to sin must be conceded to Mary. Of the Blessed Virgin Mary, for the honor in Christ, when we treat of sin, I do not wish that she should be involved, for we know that a greater grace was accorded her wholly to conquer sin, by the very fact that she merited to conceive and bear him, of whom we certainly know that he had no sin. Although these words of St. Augustine could be limited to the immunity of Mary with regard to actual sin alone, for even that would be a special privilege, nevertheless, in the opinion of this holy doctor, it must be understood as exemption from original sin. St. Augustine points out clearly that the immunity from her actual sin presupposes exemption from original sin. Hence, as St. Augustine denies actual sin in Mary, he consequently denies original sin as its cause. Julian threw rude invectives against St. Augustine, for he accused him of being more of an enemy of Mary's through this doctrine on the universality of original sin. As far as Julian was concerned, Augustine was a greater heretic than Jovinian. He says to Augustine, he, Jovinian, makes Mary's virginity come to an end owing to the condition of parturition. You deliver Mary herself to the devil owing to the condition of birth. To which St. Augustine replied, we do not deliver Mary to the devil owing to the condition of birth, because this condition is broken by the grace of being born again. These words of St. Augustine must be understood as preservative grace, by which Mary, who should by right have been conceived in original sin, was preserved pure and holy by the grace of God. If Augustine's opinion did not have this meaning, the Blessed Virgin would really have been assigned to the devil through the condition of birth, but this is exactly what Augustine is speaking against. Nor is this opposed to what St. Augustine points out in another passage, that Christ alone, by reason of his conception, was exempt from original sin. He alone was born without sin, whom his virgin mother conceived without the embrace of a husband, not by the concupiscence of the flesh, but by the submission of her mind. Or to the passage that says that Mary's flesh was that of sin, for although Christ's body was conceived of the flesh of a woman who was herself conceived carnally, he was not conceived in that way. Christ's flesh, not originating from carnal commingling, since it was formed by the power of the Holy Ghost in the womb of the Virgin, was exempt from sin through the exigence of his conception. But the Blessed Virgin, born of Joachim and Anne by carnal commingling, would contract the debt of sin by virtue of sexual generation, and thus her carnal flesh and the soul united to it would have had to contract sin. Some of the fathers, after St. Augustine, anxious to defend the universal propagation of original sin and its connection with human generation, make no mention of the privilege of Mary's conception, but there are some who were opposed to such a high privilege. Among others, St. Leo says that Jesus Christ alone, among the sons of men, was born innocent because he alone was conceived without the stain of carnal concupiscence. Le Bachelet comments on St. Augustine's texts and shows how all sexual generation is subject to the law of concupiscence, and that although Mary was conceived by Joachim and Anne by carnal generation and was remotely subject to the debt of original sin, she was preserved from original sin by a unique privilege. He also refers to the controversy which arose at the time in regard to Mary's privilege. However, testimony in favor of Mary's privilege is not lacking among the fathers and writers at this time. St. Peter Chrysologus says that the dignity of this virgin was announced by name because Mary in the Hebrew tongue is Lady in Latin. She was blessed, for she was the only one among men worthy of hearing the words, "Thou hast found grace," a plenitude of grace. Sermon 140 and 142. Among others giving testimony of Mary's privilege at this time are the poets St. Maximus of Turin, Prudentius, and Sedulius. Sedulius sings, "And as the tender rose blooms amid sharp thorns, having nothing harmful, conceals its mother with its honor, so likewise Mary, coming from the stem of Eve, as the new virgin, might expiate and misdeed of the ancient virgin." In the 6th century, St. Fulgentius said that the seduced woman deceived the first man, and an inviolate virgin conceived the second. Venantius Fortunatus is representative of the poets of this century in singing Mary's praises. The author of the 12 Sermons on Mary, including among the doubtful works of St. Ildefonso, says that Mary is the blessed soul through whom the author of life entered the world, through whom the malediction of the first parents was destroyed, and the blessing of heaven extended throughout the world. In another, in De Assumption St. Marii, in another passage in Native S. De Genetrix, he conveys the truth of Mary's distinct birth of sterile parents, which is not the usual thing, and of her freedom of all stain of carnal sin in soul and body. The deacon Paul, most acceptable to the Emperor Charlemagne, praises the work of divine mercy which repaired the fall of man. As soon as the first earth-born parent perished from swallowing the poison of the malicious serpent, an infectious poison flowing therefrom and infiltrating the race inflicted upon the whole of it a deep wound. But the Savior, having compassion on creatures and discerning the untouched womb of the propitiatory Virgin, committed to her the bringing of the joy of salvation to the world, languishing in its deadly crime. I don't know why I wanted to read all that, but because it doesn't explain the connection between the city of God. Hold on. There's a lot in regards to all this. Well, anyway, another kind of synchronicity was that I got this book, History of the Franks, by Gregory of Tours. It was sent by a guy who happens to be like a head of the University of Notre Dame, and I had looked that up and found that out after I put this book up here on top of this book, Notre Dame of Paris. Like, because he's like some guy at the University of Notre Dame. And I just thought that was weird. And then after like just researching more, I found out that the Notre Dame Cathedral is like dedicated to Mary. But anyway, I'll get into some of that in a bit. But what else does it say? Edward Kelly. Whether is this language known in any part of the world or no? If it be, where and to whom? Gabriel. Man in his creation, being made an innocent, was also authorized and made partaker of the power and spirit of God, whereby he not only did know all things under his creation and spoke of them properly, naming them as they were, but also was partaker of our presence in society, yea, a speaker of the mysteries of God, yea, with God himself, so that in innocency the power of his partakers with God and us, his good angels, was exalted and so became holy in the sight of God until that Choronzon, for so is the true name of that mighty devil, envying his felicity, and perceiving that the substance of his lesser part was frail and unperfect in respect of his pure essence, began to assail him, and so prevailed. That offending so became accursed in the sight of God, and so lost the garden of felicity, the judgment of his understanding, but not utterly the favor of God, and was driven forth, as your scriptures record, unto the earth which was covered with brambles, where, being as dumb and not able to speak, he began to learn of necessity the language which through Edward Kelly callest one Hebrew, and yet not that two Hebrew, amongst you. So, could be Hebrew word. No, it says that. Amongst you, in which he uttered and delivered to his posterity the nearest knowledge he had of God, his creatures, and from his own self divided his speech into 3 parts, 12, 3, and 7, the number whereof remaineth, but the true forms and pronunciations want, and therefore is not of that force that it was in his own dignity, much less to be compared with this that we deliver, which Adam verily spake in innocency, and was never uttered nor disclosed to man since till now, wherein the power of God must work, and wisdom in her true kind be delivered, which are not to be spoken of in any other thing, neither to be taked of with man's imagination. For as this work and gift is of God, which is all power, so doth he open it in a tongue of power, to the intent that the proportions may agree in themselves. For it is written, Wisdom sitteth upon an hill, and beholdeth the 4 winds, and girdeth herself together as the brightness of the morning, which is visited with a few, and dwelleth alone as though he were a widow. Thus you see there the necessity of this tongue, the excellency of it, and the cause why it is preferred before that which you call Hebrew. For it is written, Every lesser consenteth to his greater. I trust this is sufficient. Edward Kelly. As concerning the power, what is it? Gabriel. What it is, that it is, for the knowledge of it may lead you to error. So, what is it? That makes me... that leads directly into what I wanted to get into. Anyway, this answer offended greatly Edward Kelly, and thereupon he left off, and would receive no more at their hands. God make him patient, and a favor of this action as soon as it is needful that he should be. So, what is it? Here it doesn't mention it. Oh yeah, it does. Manna, the food divinely provided in the wilderness. Who or what? From, out of. And so this whole, like, post 87, I kind of went into, not too deeply, but I touched upon Soma from the Rig Veda. But then in Hebrew and, the Bible, they mention Manna, sometimes archaically spelled Manna with one N, but in Hebrew it's MN. So just Mem Nun 90, or Mem Nun Final 740. But sometimes it's described in the Bible and the Quran, which again, Mary is the only woman mentioned in the Quran and is apparently like highly revered even in Islam, which I didn't know. But going back to Gabriel, going back to 251 that I mentioned. Gabriel is 251, Uriel, Mary. But just to throw that out there. But this 90 thing came, like, I was like, what is it about Manna? And obviously they don't even know what the hell it was, but some people say it was like dew, some people say it was aphids. But really it even means, what is it? In the biblical account, the name Manna is said to derive from the question, man who? Seemingly meaning, what is it? Which is perhaps derived from Aramaic, not Hebrew. Manna is possibly cognate with the Arabic term man, meaning aphids, with man hu, thus meaning this is aphids, which fits one widespread modern identification of manna as the crystallized honeydew of certain scale insects. In the environment of a desert, such honeydew rapidly dries due to evaporation of its water content, becoming a sticky solid and then turning whitish, yellowish, or brownish, kind of like DMT. In particular, there is a scale insect that feeds on tamarisk, the tamarisk manna scale, the secretions of which are often considered to be the prime candidate for biblical manna. Many Christian vegetarians say God had originally intended that man would not eat meat because plants cannot move and killing them would not be sinful. Manna, a non-meat substance, is used to support this theory. So yeah, some people link it to coriander seed. So see also Soma and Haoma. The Manna Machine. This book is kind of rare, but I remember hearing about it. Nuclear reactor. It makes me think of this Sampo too. Magical device or object described in many different ways, constructed by the blacksmith inventor and originally the sky god Ilmarinen, which brings riches and good fortune to its holder, akin to the horn of plenty or cornucopia. And this kind of relates somewhat to the Hashamir, or which I think is a laser or cutting torch. Not really, but like just in being an ancient mystery technology. Anyway, I was thinking of 90, like I said, I was thinking of it as relating to Jesus primarily because of its relationship. Really, the star and the king or the emperor is, goes back to the whole Crowley's switching of Zodi or the star and the emperor with Zodi and Hay. I'll have to come back to this. Obviously, Zodi final can be 900, and another mystery regarding some mystery concoction or chemical of wormwood, but yet connecting also to the star. Certain commentators have held that this great star represents one of the several important figures in political or ecclesiastical history. Chernobyl. Anyway, Absinthion is 900, and so it's prophesied star or angel. But that comes to mind. But when I was thinking in the last post about what I had said about like the star relating at least somewhat to the Pleiades, I mean, really there's the evening and the morning star, which are given different, it's sometimes the planet Mercury, sometimes it's Venus. Where was the morning star? Venus, sometimes Sirius. Oops. So this concept of the 6, really the 5, 6, 7, and 8 pointed star, I kind of analyzed, and I thought it was weird that 6 times 7 times 8, which I kind of mentioned in the last 6, 7, and 8 in the last post, 336, but then stars, 330, the 6, 7, and 8 stars, yet another star. I don't know, it just made me wonder, like, the historical ramifications or connections between these different stars. Obviously, this is a kind of important star. It's really a shield also. Majan David is 107, connecting with gold. A naked woman kneels by the water. One foot is in the water and one foot is on the land. Above her head is one large star representing her core essences and 7 smaller stars representing the chakras. The star is, or really, 7 days, there's so many sevens, but the fractal. The star is typically 8-pointed, but some late 15th century depictions depict a 6-pointed star instead. In each hand she holds a jug. From one jug she pours a liquid into the water. From the other jug she pours a liquid into the water, and from the other jug she pours a liquid onto the land. The 5 senses are represented by the 5 unique lines formed by water spilled on the ground. Temperance, the 14th major arcana card, also has a foot on both land and water while pouring water, but is depicted as standing and rigid. Again, it's Michael in the Temperance card. Michael and Temperance make 888, but then it's also called Art, and Art and Temperance make 999, which I mentioned. I don't know what to make of that other than they were like guideposts. But it is the first out of the 3 cards in the major arcana to depict celestial imagery. Sometimes 3 men representing the 3 magi are depicted below the star. And again, the card right before it is the Tower, which kind of points to the star. That has a lot of connections. Anyway, so where was I going to go with this? The evening star, the morning star, the star wormwood. The wand came up kind of in relation to when I was researching. I don't really remember how it came up, but I ended up finding some interesting codes. Let me go find them where I wrote them down. In the history of the wand, and it kind of connects with the birth, whole Mary's relation to birth. But anyway, during the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, apotropaic wands began to be used during childbirth ceremonies. These wands were made out of hippopotamus tusks, which that stood out to me, so I calculated it. Hey, Yod, Pei, An, Teth, Aleph, Mem, Vav, Samek. And I was like, don't tell me tusks. Hippopotamus tusks, like the original wands, is 666, which were split down the middle lengthwise, producing 2 wands, each with 1 flat side and 1 curved side. Due to the curved nature of a hippopotamus tusk, these wands were curved with 1 pointed end, the point of the tusk, and 1 blunt end, where the tusk was removed from the hippopotamus. Hippopotamus tusks may have been used to invoke Taweret. Oh yeah, this is where it connects. So, Ta'ert, essentially, who is related to the tarot. Tarot is 289, which is the star. So the star card of the tarot, but 289 is 17 times 17, the star card of the tarot. Just similar to how 19 times 19 is 361, the solar circle with the dot, which is the star or the sun card. So there's like a distinction and a relation there. But 289 is also Furba, really the double Vishva Vajra, and its relation with 88, and even symbolically with the 2 8s. Anyway, Ta'ert, who we'll get into that here in a minute. The earliest apotropaic wands used in Egypt were undecorated, but from around 1850 BC, they were usually provided with decorations of apotropaic figures directly related to the sun religion or particular aspects of it, inscribed on the convex upper side, most of whom carried knives to ward off evil forces. These apotropaic wands were also inscribed with the protective text on the flat side, such as, "Cut off the head of the enemy when he enters the chamber of the children whom the lady has borne." The latest apotropaic wand found belongs to the second intermediate period king Senebke. It seems that the use of these objects in Egypt declines after this point. So, I just thought that was crazy. Really, when you put two of these together, you would get the vesica. Come to find, the vesica is 90. And obviously the geometry of the vesica is like replete in, let's see, where did I find it? Here, the Chalice Well, also known as Red Spring, is a well situated near the summit of Chalice Hill, a small hill next to Glastonbury Tor. The natural spring and surrounding gardens are owned and managed by the Chalice Well Trust, founded by Wellesley Tudor Pole in 1959. So it's connected to an aquifer. And what's crazy is there's a lot of weird stuff about this. So Christian mythology suggests that Chalice Well marks the site where Joseph of Arimathea placed the chalice that had caught the drops of Christ's blood at the crucifixion, linking the well to the wealth of speculation surrounding the existence of the Holy Grail. The red of the water is also said by some Christians to represent the rusty iron nails used at the crucifixion. It is said that beneath its waters, Joseph of Arimathea hid the chalice of the Last Supper, and immediately the waters flowed red. According, however, to William of Malmesbury, who first recorded the well, the waters gushed sometimes red and sometimes blue. According to local lore, the waters from this well have three attributes in common with human blood. The waters are red, the water coagulates as does hemoglobin, and the water is warm. The iron content gives both the reddish color and the coagulation of rust and accumulation of ferric oxide. The subterranean water from the well is often warmer than the surface ground temperature, and even in the winter, roses near the well bloom when other plants and flowers further away do not. Indeed, the holy thorn tree, also known as the Glastonbury thorn, blooms in the Chalice Well garden every Christmas. The local legend says that this tree took root where Joseph of Arimathea drove his staff into the ground near the well. Frequent events are held, blah, blah, blah. So, when you read about this guy who, I guess, the guy who owned and managed and founded this situation, even though I guess it goes back a long time. I don't know. I got to read into it more. I don't know the whole timeline. But Pohl authored many pamphlets and books and was a lifelong pursuer of religious and mystical questions and visions, particularly involved with the Baha'i faith and a quest for the Holy Grail of Arthurian legend. He founded the Silent Minute campaign, which was followed internationally. Late in life, he resuscitated the trust running the Chalice Well. So, what it says is that Pohl's life of experiencing visions took its first lasting step forward in 1902. That year, he had a serious illness with some kind of vision. Whether that experience or another, he also later claimed having vivid dreams of being a monk at Glastonbury, which inspired a strong enough interest for him to visit there that year and had further experiences that led to further trips to gain inspiration, and spoke of it as a pilgrimage. In light of later developments, it may be interesting to take note of Thomas Breakwell, who died in Paris in 1902. Hold on, everything just gets more complicated. Discovery of the Baha'i Faith. Anyway, I'll have to read that later. Ultimately, a cup was found, about which there was much inquiry and news coverage. Pole and his assistants recounted the whole affair as they knew it before a group in July 1907, including Archdeacon of Westminster Basil Wilberforce, saying, "He may be deluded himself, but one thing is perfectly certain, that he is not going to attempt to delude you." In the early 20th century, there was a porous relationship between liberal Christianity and esoteric or spiritualist ideas, Eastern philosophy, social causes, and Eastern religions. Over 40 high-status individuals were at this meeting to discuss the cup and Pole's and assistants' experiences. These 40 can be thought of as a spectrum of interests in this milieu inside and outside mainstream Christianity when they met, some of them leaders in that discourse of ideas. Like Pole, who can be summed up as a centerpiece of a Celtic network, in the sense of Celtic by connotation and reputation, though not history, and Albert Basil Wilberforce, who was a leader among the more Christian elephants, though with clear proclivity to associate with other kinds of religiosity. The story was recounted for the group. In later 1904, Pole had a feeling of a pending discovery to be made in Glastonbury that would link the founder of the Christian faith with modern leaders of Christian thought, and left word to watch for such a discovery with Roman Catholic college priest there. Pole was inspired by the idea that a pre-Christian culture had existed in Ireland which had extended itself to Glastonbury and Iona, and which was the repository of an authentic Western mystical tradition, the true roots of the spiritual life in the West. Still, his pursuits are also blended identification with the mystic East, with interest in Hermeticism, Theosophy, and Spiritualism. In some respects, Tudor Pole's pursuits mirror the activities of those promoting the Celtic revival in Ireland during this period, and possibly the revival of the Sumerian tradition of Crowley. Though a distinct, or at least that comes to mind, though a distinct alterity in their worldview is acknowledged. In Pole's second visit, he envisioned 3 maidens who would help in the work in Glastonbury and had brought his sister Catherine in on successive visits there. Then in 1905, he added 2 friends to the interest and trips. Allen sisters, who went in early September, and another the 11th through 12th of November, during the latter of which one had a vision of a woman's hand raising a cup out of a stream and returned. Then Pole envisioned a specific spot while at a business meeting in Bristol, and was able to send the Allen sisters the same day to the particular spot. They had been there a couple times previous. So this makes me think of the Green Stone story of Peatman and Colin, or I forgot the names of the 2 people, but later carried forward with this The Seventh Sword by Andrew Collins. But there, amidst some 3 feet of water and another couple of feet of mud, they found a cup, but decided it was too sacred for them to handle, so they washed it and left it in the water. 1 October 1906, so a while later, Pole was able to send his sister on a chill, rainy day to get it and brought it to their Clifton house in Bristol. This well was the St. Bride's Well, a reference to St. Bridget of Kildare, a kind of holy well. Pole began to consult with people about the cup, but also to entertain the visionary experiences of others that appeared to link with his own and led to Pole's quest. In mid-December, Pole consulted with Annie Besant, president of the British Theosophy Society the next year, as well as the British Museum and South Kensington Museum, and Swedish Princess Karaja, who connected with him Helena Humphreys, who from then was much involved with the quest. She felt it was a cup from the Last Supper and handed toward Peter, which was kept by a woman attendant, and then felt the cup had migrated to a European church in between, until finally at the ruins of Glastonbury. What book is this from? The Two Worlds of Wellesley Tudor Pole. Pole also consulted with A.E. Waite, who confirmed it had some characteristics of the Holy Grail, details of which were linked with the legend of King Arthur and the vision of Sir Percival of it. So I guess it's the same. In fall 1906, however, later in September, Waite disavowed the cup as the Holy Grail itself. In fall 1906 and again in spring 1907, Pole consulted with medical doctor and collector John Goodchild, who slowly unfolded his story. Goodchild claimed to have bought it in 1887, that his father had claimed it with a sense of importance, and following a vision in Paris in 1897, and the death of his father, who sent it back by courier, decided to leave it in a well in Glastonbury. Goodchild's Paris vision indicated that his visitor came to you at a very great danger to myself to tell you, which may be the first indication of ideas of a threatening conditions among the discarnate. Goodchild tried to watch out for its future discovery and even brought a woman friend to the well, hoping for it to be discovered. Goodchild had visionary experiences in August and September of 1906, and as a result sent Pole a letter with a drawing of one of his visions, a vision of a cup with 5 stars, to be passed on to whomever the pilgrims who have just been to Glastonbury were, and was there in late September when the Allen sisters returned in their original find of the cup, though he did not relate his history with the cup to them, but was very enthusiastic for their find. Pole and his sister then visited Goodchild in late September, but shared only part of the story. Pole never did find any confirming evidence of Goodchild's statements on the history of the cup. Of the origin, placing, and recovery of the cup, some processes and timings have been associated with Celtic and mystical thought and may have been a paradigm by which both Pole and Goodchild may have had a common framework of thinking. I was just thinking of how the cup relates to the mind. But the importance observed with respect to the cup was seen amidst ideas of matriarchal background of Ireland via Goodchild, compared to a more Arthurian context for Pole. June 23, 1907, Pole showed the cup to the Archdeacon of Westminster, who invited then visitor Samuel Clemens, who remarked upon it, and then to a group of notables, July 20th, including George Howard, 9th Earl of Carlisle, Henry Pelham Clinton, 7th Duke of Newcastle, Charles Wood, 2nd Viscount Halifax, Reginald John Campbell, William Crooks, and Oliver Lodge, and Whitelaw Reid, who gathered at home of Basil Wilberforce. Along with reporting on the visionary experiences leading to the finding of the cup, Pole reported other visionary experiences which he claimed as prophecies. These were received instructions while awake and not through a seance, such as there would be a definite tangible proof connecting the cup to Jesus, the cup will return to Glastonbury, and the area would become a site of physical and spiritual healing, and advance the idea that it was the place of the first touch of Christianity to the land. See Myths and Legends of Glastonbury. Pole warned of a divine outpouring of the Holy Spirit in the world, and great intelligences preparing channels through which this divine power, this second coming, this great outpouring of the Holy Ghost shall be manifested, which conditionally could be channeled by and magnify church unity in the high position of Britain, but if not, it would no longer remain the great nation she is, and the center of the world will be transferred to a very different country, and other agencies will be found. And a signal event in this process and a kind of deadline for that condition of unity was going to be in 1911, when Those who have been watching and preparing the way for the second coming will recognize a great teacher who will be here and will be recognized by a few in that year. The great teacher will be a woman and recognized by those who are, as I say, preparing the way by a 7-pointed star that will be worn on her forehead, but not be recognized by official Christianity. The prophecies were envisioning a rebirth of Christian unity among the islands of Great Britain and a rival to the Roman Catholic Lord's site. But if unity could not be achieved, another situation would be found and another country take the fore in the world. The cup became very well known and is still commented upon in a variety of contexts. Wilberforce accepted the cup as the Holy Grail. Pohl claimed it was at one time in the possession of Jesus and provided the opportunity for a new, wider religious framework in terms of respect for geography, as well as a breadth of ideas which were later taken up as a theme of New Age thought. The fact that newspaper accounts validating the seriousness of the proceedings and reception of the claim is argued to fit into this being not just about a curio, but about a meeting of ideas, including but not dominated by differences of ideas. The meeting had been meant to be quiet and private among the group, but it was published in the newspaper a week later. Indeed, it was carried in the news internationally. Though the cup was soon understood by most to be too modern, and Wilberforce's enthusiasm for it caused complications with his superiors, Wilberforce continued his associations and investigations of religious connectivity. For Pohl, the meeting introduced him to a higher profile of engagement with the exchange of ideas. Pohl and his sisters and supporters began to host the cup in the upper room of his home in Bristol and called it the Oratory, which is a small chapel especially for private worship. In this period of activity around the cup, various visions developed among Pohl and others who became associated with it. Leslie Moore was in South Africa in March 1907 and had a vision news would come in late July of a remarkable find. She sailed for England in June and stayed with a friend, Miss Hoey, and learned of the coverage of a find. She sailed for England in June and stayed with a friend, Miss Hoey, and learned of the coverage and find, and let Pohl know of her experiences before the end of July, and that she had visions of papers which would give an account of the cup. She envisioned what seemed to her a large Catholic church with a priest in red vestments, when there was a loud banging on the doors and people became afraid. An acolyte then escaped through a tunnel system which led to a chapel with a scroll in the cup. And then he left with the cup along further tunnels coming out into a church ruin. She wrote to her friend who sent it on to Pohl, and he sent a telegram asking her to come to visit in London. She, Miss Hoey, and Helena Humphreys gathered. There, Pohl identified the church as the Church of San Sophia, a part of the Hagia Sophia complex in Constantinople. This encounter solidified Soul's sense of a quest. And again, it's like these different people who have visions and connect to these different things. It's similar. It makes me think of Outside the Circles of Time and Nema, and will really be on the Mov Zone also with Zivorad and again the Green Stone. There, Pohl identified the church. I read that. Another who became involved was Alice Buckton. She attended the Wilberforce meeting and then to the Oratory in late September 1907, and later went on pilgrimage to see Abdul-Baha, then leader of the Baha'i faith, in early 1910, when Pohl went that winter. Buckton went on to buy the Chalice Well in 1913, which would later host the cup. Wilberforce and Buckton were among those later close to the religion. Constantinople and the quest. Initially, his quest was for textual proof of the cup, but also the mystical heritage of Christianity and a framework or gateway to engaging in a wider unity, especially in Christianity, but beyond too, including other Celtic or Keltist investigations. Thus, with the mediumship inputs, Pole sent out for Constantinople. First trip. Pole's first attempt, leaving for Constantinople, came at the end of August 1907. There he gained access to the gardens around the church, but was stymied by a slab of marble blocking a tunnel, but then there had visions of finding a lost library of Emperor Justinian, which would be a very significant factor for the rest of his life in the quest. By 1 October, he began to speculate of worldly powers becoming interested in his search. Pole had left Constantinople before Muslim observance of Ramadan, which was across the mid-October into November that year. On his return, and amidst crowds now visiting the oratory, the three ladies warned Pole of his assistant while he was in Constantinople, but he didn't agree with some of the visions of the ladies, which became stronger after he returned. Second trip. Pole left on his second trip back to the Church of San Sofia in later 1907 in disguise and would stay into early 1908. He later described an incident he claimed of an attempted poisoning and of attempting to murder him. He further explored tunnels, but it was unsafe and turned his attention to a possible entrance along the coast. No excavation or access was allowed amidst the time and his position as a foreigner. While there, he also learned of the Baha'i faith, and particularly of Abdul-Baha. Pole was much impressed by the fact that Abdul-Baha could exert such an influence from within prison walls. When I returned to London, I found that very little was known of the movement, and I determined to visit Abdul-Baha and discover for myself the secret of his power. It has been claimed that he learned this from early Baha'i Stanwood Cobb, who was teaching at Robert College in Constantinople, after converting to Baha'i faith in 1906 at Green Acre. And it's funny, just a little bit of reading about them. Like, they've got a 9-point star, and then the symbols of the religion are derived from the Arabic word Baha, splendor or glory, with a numerical value of 9. Baha. Now, returned to the UK, the group Pole decided access to the oratory was cut off from January 1908 to September 1910. More experts met about the cup late in January as well, and they generally felt it was not ancient, yet it was still bringing people together from east and west. Further trips were complicated by the intensifying tensions to the region. The whole situation is seen as part of the Green Game, rivalry between British and Russian empires over influence in Central Asia, primarily Afghanistan, Persia, and Tibet. From earlier, that coalesced into the Young Turk Revolution in July 1908. Early Baha'i Sidney Sprague, visiting from America, met with Pole in London, answering questions as well as literature he could share. Pole later also mentions reading the report of Orientalist E.G. Brown meeting Baha'u'llah. Third attempt ends at Abdul-Baha. In 1908, Pole left for a third attempt on the quest amidst the visions and prophecies and experiences he had. This time he was going to start from the southern Mid-East to see museums for comparable evidence about the cup, but started with wanting to meet Abdul-Baha, who by then was in Alexandria, Egypt. Abdul-Baha was freed from political arrest in September. Pole later reported an anecdote from the trip. On the way to meeting Abdul-Baha, he had an encounter with a sheikh who thoughtfully observed a problem with imperialism. He said, "A traveler walking through the streets of a town came across a house with its windows broken and its doors askew. Inside the house, everything was in turmoil. He went into the house, and finding the owner, said to him, "Your house requires putting in order. It is full of disorder. May I call my servants and put things straight for you?" The owner accepted the offer, so the traveler then called in his attendants and set the house in order. Having done this, he built a hut in the garden outside the house, and turning to the owner said, "This is a very nice house. Now it has been spring cleaned, it is in beautiful order, and I and my servants will inhabit it. You can go into the hut and live there, but I will take possession of your house and administer it in my own way and for my own ends," which he then shared in 1914. Pol arrived to meet with Abdu'l-Bahá, and the translator for the meeting might have been Shoghi Effendi, one of Abdu'l-Bahā's grandsons who acted as translators. At their next meeting, Abdu'l-Bahá said Pol was to soon return instead of going forward with search. And when Pol adjusted his plans, a bit confused but willing to obey, Abdu'l-Bahá asked him to bring along a package of money for a Persian student in Paris with eye trouble. Without address or any specific contact information, and Pol feeling the money could have been wired more efficiently than delivered by him, but Pol indeed did find him by chance after several searches failed. Pol reported he arrived home in time to avoid personal and business catastrophe. However odd this was for him, Pol was noted for his in-stride acceptance of miracles. Back in the UK, by 1909, Pol felt that tremendous events were about to take place, and the great onrushing of the breath of God, seen as this great wave that had reached the border of our human consciousness and had begun to penetrate it. But there was also visions of a war in the air, of the realm of the discarnate. He also began to speak at meetings such as at Colston Hall in Bristol in May about vegetarianism, and was elected president of the Bristol Vegetarian Society by December. In 1910, resumption of access to the cup started, and Pol and his ladies assisting took the cup to the island of Iona to revive the place as a spiritual center. Pol began to collect anecdotes of visionary experiences he ultimately published in The Silent Road much later in 1960, in the article The Mastery of the Citadel, which was published first in 1915 and then again in 1966. Pol also wrote a letter to the Christian Commonwealth on the Brotherhood of Man, which led interest of other seekers who joined the Baha'i faith. In June, Pol met Robert Felkin, who later also joined the Baha'i faith as well. In June, Pol could not make meetings of the Vegetarian Society, and in August he spoke in Herefordshire on healing the body by spiritual means. It's crazy, like, just yesterday I was reading about, I'd heard from some videos, I forgot what, but someone had mentioned that Matthew 17:21 is excised from many Bibles, and yet it's where Jesus says to pray and fast to heal yourself. It's kind of important, but they took it out. Anyway, because apparently they found evidence that it was added later, but there's a lot of stuff like that in the Bible. About the same time, Pol met Neville Meakin, who was a senior member of a group spun off from the fragmentation of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, who hoped Pol would become a successor heir. Meakin attended the oratory in September, went on to meet with Abdu'l-Bahá several times. However, Meakin died in 1912, unable to finish the stages of initiation of the group for Pol. And such interests for Pol, such as they were, ended. In September, visitors from India involved in the Brahmo Samaj movement came to see the cup in the oratory and felt it was bringing a chance for mystical awareness across people of different beliefs. At other times, the ladies associated with the cup in the oratory performed baptisms and weddings, though without the labels of being priests or priestesses. Meanwhile, Pol went on to meet with Abdu'l-Bahá again in 1910 in Egypt and sent a letter to Scotland with second-hand reports from Abdu'l-Baha of a prediction of a world war in light of the anticipated Armageddon of the Book of Revelation and beyond the generality of the 20th century. Writer Patrick Benham related Pohl learning of Abdu'l-Baha only in 1910 through Archdeacon Wilberforce. Pohl felt a healing presence and a confirmation of Abdu'l-Baha as a world teacher. In the words of Patrick Benham, Pohl went on to then have his own visions of the same ideas of this foretold conflict and returning home. Pohl's mirrored vision started as a depressing foreboding, starting with mighty winds and strange, perfect silence. A sound of thunder followed, so indescribable and so terrible that it seems as if the world would be rent to pieces. The thunder passed, and the hill was bathed in quiet light, and I became aware of a mighty presence standing beside me, full of strength and illumination, which made me comprehend the significance of many events that were to transpire. Pohl spoke to the London Baha'is about Abdu'l-Baha and repeated his 1911 prophecy ideas on December 31st, 1910. The Baha'is also managed a higher thought center in London in 1910 and a Baha'i press in 1911. After 1910, Pohl felt he was a member of a group working in borderlanded between the normal consciousness of people and that of the discarnate peoples, in preparation for the descent and control of the new spiritual currents that were to leaven humanity or human thought and ideas, which may or may not be the group that would identify the great teacher woman with the star. Abdu'l-Baha, across earlier 1911, there are various newspaper reports of Pohl. January 1911, Pohl appeared before the Bath Theosophical Society on behalf of the Baha'is. In June at Clifton House, he presided where Alice Buckton spoke at the meeting, then himself in early July on situations in Egypt, in August on the equality of women and men, and mention of Abdu'l-Baha coming in mid-September, and also had exchanged telegrams with Abdu'l-Baha while attending a Theosophy summer meeting in August. Pohl lived with his parents and sister at the residence. Pohl presented for Abdu'l-Baha at the Universal Races Congress in 1911. Upon Abdu'l-Baha's arrival, his translated talk was read by Pohl at the City Temple Church and also spoke at a number of theosophical meetings, and then Abdu'l-Baha stayed at Pohl's home in Bristol. The home acted as a center, offering themed weekend retreats and a visit to the oratory housing the cup. Two kinds of reports exist of the visit. In one, Abdu'l-Baha went to every room and blessed it, and in another he blessed the cup itself in silence, rather differently than other blessings he offered. Compare with recorded affirmations of things like Bible. The second version is not publicized in Baha'i works. So the Abdu'l-Baha visit started 27th of September 1911, and the location is known as the Clifton Guest House next to Pohl's own home. A collection of records of talks and information has been published of his visits to Bristol, along with a variety of efforts across time. Early Baha'i Lady Blomfeld's daughters and a couple of others assisted in the comforting of the guests during their visit, as well as taking notes and managing appointments. Pohl's biographer, Gregory Fenge, interprets Pohl's prophecy of the great teacher as Abdu'l-Baha, though not a woman or with a visible seven-pointed star on his forehead. A correspondent with Fenge has interpreted the vision of a woman with stars as the divine maiden who was guiding Abdu'l-Baha. While Abdu'l-Baha went back to Egypt for the winter, in early 1912, Pohl was again visible in some newspaper accounts. In February 1912, Pohl lectured in Gloucester, a meeting in Bristol in May, and a Clifton House initiative in June, before going to London in early August, shortly before getting married in later August. One of the Allen sisters moved away and married in April. Pohl's sister Mary had married in February 1911. Pole was amidst running the Clifton House in 1904 through 1914. A talk of polls made the news over in America in June. In October, he had thought out wider ideas of conspiracies that might be in league against him finding Christian manuscripts, the original quest. He prepared detailed ideas for returning to Constantinople, but was unable to get away, and met and developed a deep friendship with Scottish businessman David Russell, who himself warned Pole that he was convinced the mental and other conditions influenced visions and understandings of mediums and intuitive ideas one might have, a kind of open-minded skepticism which could be affected by senses of divided loyalties. Indeed, Abdu'l-Baha sometimes separates dreams and visions into three categories: true, interpretative, and confused. At least some of this guidance was related, circa 1908, in a widely disseminated Some Answered Questions. The first do not need interpretation, but depend on having, according to Abdu'l-Baha, in the words of Nekati al-Khan, a heart rid of all attachment, and there must not exist idle thoughts in the mind. The second can be decoded for the truth, and the third only reflect the strife and contention of the experiencer. According to Abdu'l-Baha, the work of decoding the second type is like, in Nekati al-Khan's words, if you add any color to a white cloth, it will accept it. But if you add blue to the yellow cloth, it will become green and the truth is distorted. In order to have the true color, one needs to remove the added color. Indeed, sometimes Abdu'l-Baha notes such experiences can mean the opposite of what they seem. And Ricky Bradshaw, who experienced a deep near-death experience when asked if such an experience was key to gaining enlightenment, said, "Having a near-death experience does not make you enlightened. It is an introduction, perhaps, more a hindrance than help." Abdu'l-Baha returned again, visiting the Poles, now married, after coming from America in early January 1913. He also spoke at more theosophical meetings in Britain. Pole had ideas that Abdu'l-Baha might travel to Russia, Turkestan, and India in the coming year or so, and unlikely to travel west again. Pole was with Abdu'l-Baha in France in 1913 and heard him foretell of the war followed some day in the future by the most great peace. His and Florence's first child, Jean, was born in the oratory in 1914. In May, wartime. In May, Pole writes of an experience of being called to help frigid souls who had just died, drowned, and were lost and feeling terrorized. He wanted to get better at aiding newly dead individuals. In early July, Pole had bought a ticket for Constantinople, but with the brewing war, the plan did not go forward. In August, he writes of feeling layers of the warfare in the intermediary spheres was ending, and that the newly dead were having an easier time transitioning, as if some great edict has gone forth. Pole wrote of his understanding of Baha'i ideas of Armageddon prophecy in September to another long associated with religion, Mrs. Jane White, also called a theosophist, who also hosted Abdu'l-Baha and was the receiver of the tablet 7 Candles of Unity. All nations that look upon brute force as worthy of worship must share the blame for what has led to the present crisis. Superficially, it would appear that Germany has plunged the world into war. But if we look back into the past few centuries, we shall see that nearly all the countries of Europe are responsible, among them Great Britain, and therefore they must all share the responsibility for the situation now developing. We must remember that Germany is to a large extent only attempting to copy Britain. We cannot afford to throw stones, but as a nation should endeavor to cultivate a little humility. And then spoke in London on the theme Some Deeper Aspects of the Great War, and available in earlier 1915. Whatever reprieve felt was going on in the worlds of consciousness. In later 1914, Pohl begins to speak of visions of conflict in the air, for the war in heaven of the Battle of St. Michael and others, terminology that he grew in use across decades, and also to write a point of view expression of the battles. These experiences were gathered from about 1915 and published in his first book, Private Doubting, along with what he felt were the personal experiences of that person. In March 1916, he spoke at the Higher Thought Center in London, but felt it went badly and that he should take a vow of silence, and was depressed. In March, he volunteered for military service, though he could have sought a release from service as he had a company that sold biscuits to the military. While thus occupied, his sister Catherine was the keeper of the cup. In later March, or a year later, in March 1917, he felt the presence of a soldier, but it was not a communication yet. And in August, he began the process of automatic writing, and this, together with earlier work, resulted in the book Private Doubting. The book also discussed a Baha'i-informed spiritualist paradigm of engagement with the world and of revivals of existing religions. A notebook was also begun recording experiences of being of assistance to the newly dead by giving them a mental environment to aid them in their transition. He was noted away from the Vegetarian Society meeting in June. Volunteer. I don't know how much I want to read of all this, but it's like crazy. In September, he started as an officer's candidate in the Royal Marines and was assigned as a second lieutenant in the 3rd Company of the Cheshire Regiment. Pohl participated in some meetings in Bristol in June and October of 1917. This is just making me think of the 1917 Mary sighting. I don't know I forgot what it's called. The Miracle of the Sun, October 13th, mentioned before, along with Wells, Sacred Wells, Post 82. It's just what it makes me think of. Whatever the hell. In October 1917, Pohl also experienced opposition from a business partner in his visibility in reporting his psychic experiences. At first, he thought he was going to France, but come November, he knew he was going to Egypt and already was anxious about the safety of Abdu'l-Baha. Pohl's family and friends gathered in November for the send-off, but also had family vision experiences where Mary led and Pohl followed, including that various masters would speak to him, and he was under special protection and consecrated, and his family would also be protected and told by a master in the discarnate world, "You are to be made known to those who serve me in the world. I am going to initiate you into great mysteries. Fail not in your task, because upon you depends the successful accomplishment of a great mission." However, similar to his experience going to school, going to military training became a more intense period of suffering. He began to carry on a correspondence with social leaders who had been previously interested in his activities. His military superiors took note. He gave up exemption from service. Then he learned he was on personal terms with superiors in the government and society, and began to fawn on him somewhat, fixing things that should have been fixed but were only attended to because he was there. Initially, he served with the Devons, Devonshire, mostly on after-battle salvaging, sometimes under starry skies. A conversation Pohl had with a friend anticipated his death and became the basis of the Silent Mute published circa 1940. Pohl was wounded in the attack of occupied Jerusalem in early December. His friend did get killed, as was his aide. He had no support in the hospitalization and was a bit hysterical too. Following this, Pohl was assigned to military intelligence and soon was alerted to the threat to Abdu'l-Baha. By the end of December, was sending letters along multiple channels of concern to those with access to the government. Letter campaigns addressed concerns through secondaries to the British cabinet, which began to arrive towards the end of January. In February 1918, Pole was assigned to Allenby's office and then became director of the Occupied Enemy Territory Administration. Several lines of action had brought the matter to the fore by mid-February. This was confirmed from intelligence gathering in March. Orders from the cabinet that include Lord Curzon and Lord Lamington led to the order to Allenby for the protection of Abdul-Baha and his family. Curzon had also written about Babi Baha'i history in Persia, and Lamington had met Abdul-Baha. Pole was promoted to captain in April. Battle plans were worked through the summer, and Pole was in a position to act as a host to various meetings, including Zionist activities, though he himself was too busy with work to do much with them into June. But about this time had a vision of a visiting discarnate doctor ministering to his sad condition, and an herb was prescribed, found, and bettered him. Some of Allenby's soldiers were moved to France, and Indian soldiers replaced them, to which were added some planes and bombs in September. And 2 Ottoman armies were destroyed in the battle at Megiddo, and through the Battle of Haifa, Mysore, lancers were dispatched to protect Abdul-Baha and family. Having entered Haifa the 23rd of September 1918, a date still commemorated, word of the rescue of Abdul-Baha spread. The experience has been novelized. Pole was promoted to major in November. He told his staff to mind the day and change in history. He was then in Jerusalem, and in a little more than a week was in Haifa, and then a 2.5-hour drive in a horse carriage to Akka to see Abdul-Baha. Pole later describes being with Abdul-Baha at Baha'i shrines on Mount Carmel and within the Garden Tomb. He later reported an anecdote. When I expressed my happiness that the war was over, a war to end all wars, the master looked at me with kind but sorrowful eyes and said that I should live to witness a still greater conflict, one that would largely be fought out in the air, and that it was only subsequent to this terrible event, or series of events, that the most great peace would dawn. Back at work, government and representatives of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim interests continued arguments which Pole would hear, but in off-business hours would regularly lay down to serve in distant lands and casually mention it to people and phone people and to give them warnings of events. Pole became close friend of Frederick Laveau, or Leviau, however you pronounce that, circa 1918, and in the 1930s they explored locations of Goodchild's claim, and he long held an account of Pole's trips to Constantinople. He was a lawyer in Cairo by the end of 1918. Pole left the army in May 1919 with the OBE, or Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, in June. And Pole wrote an article on Abdul-Baha for the Palestine News, which brought widespread interest locally. Back in the UK, holy moly. New business and interests and the quest. Pole was returned to England in June. After returning home, he lost or gave up the family business with some relief, and he got a letter of commendation from Churchill. Another business optimistically founded that spring and summer of 1919 had the prospect he could manage journalism and commerce branches in the Mideast. In the larger sense, however, writing in December 1920, Pole felt something went wrong after the spring of 1919. The Baha'is had already had some of the materials of, and in 1919 in New York, had a grand gathering of the formal presentation of the Tablets of the Divine Plan, which were about promulgating the religion around the world, and in several regions of the United States of America, and not the United Kingdom, which was a more important power in the world at the time, such as those of England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland as it was then. Pol sent a letter to the convention. That fall, interest in Pol's publishing books about psychic experiences in war was waxing. But the venture of an international journalism and commerce collapsed. July 1920, Shoghi Effendi arrived in Britain with tablets from Abdul-Baha to Lord Lamington and Pol, though we do not have a statement what they were about. He delivered them at a reception held for his arrival. He also consulted with Pol for places to vacation to obey a request of Abdul-Baha during the early days of his education at Oxford. In his visions, Pol believed a new war footing of tension was rising up and cutting people off from the higher worlds, especially in the strife in Ireland and Russia. A drawing of inspiration of racial consciousness meant to become wider but failing, and the flow of spiritual awakening was now misdirected and then was cut off in spring 1920. For him, examples of this were how things were going with President Wilson, the League of Nations, the Versailles Treaties, the Russian Revolution, and the like, all resulting in a halt of the fortunes of the Second Coming, the dissipation of the envisioned spiritual resources, and then they being halted. In 1921, Pol was acting as secretary of the Baha'i community in London. That summer, Pol's connections led to him being involved in the process of the independence of Egypt. Shoghi Effendi learned of the death of Abdul-Baha in later November at Pol's home, being found fainted next to the telegram. Meanwhile, the second generation of Pol and associates working on visions in the quest was disbanded, and a third generation formed this time of men. The lawyer Frederick Levau, he entered in Cairo. 2 Russian asylum seekers came with a revision on the Ouija board approach to contact with the discarnate, and they introduced Pol to a third Russian exile. Amounting to 5, they soon developed an idea that there was a mysterious 6th man to join them in the work. At the same time, the group envisioned a change in an old otherworldly contact and a new speaker joined in the messages the group were set on decoding and working with, to advance the quest in part for the lost library of materials that would revolutionize Christianity as their part of a worldwide transformation to be achieved. In March 1922, Shoghi Effendi gathered senior Baha'is from multiple countries in Haifa to discuss the near-term development of the religion. Pol was there. The initial question was whether to directly seek electing the Universal House of Justice, which the newly appointed head of the religion, Shoghi Effendi, decided firmly could not happen until there was more work establishing local and national spiritual assemblies first. The separation between Pol and the community was over exactly the question of a movement uniting and rejuvenating the existing religions versus being another religion with its own organization. May begin here. So the separation may begin here. Pol declined inclusion on ballot for the election of the local spiritual assembly of London after conversations with Shoghi Effendi, and thought he could serve the interests of Abdul-Baha and the Baha'is to act as a non-Baha'i, though in some ways Baha'is were perhaps more reluctant to work with him. Pol never criticized the religion or its institutions. Another strain was that Pol was also a firm believer in reincarnation, which, if defined as the literal return of individual personalities, is against the teachings of Abdul-Baha, noted as early as 1908 in Some Questions Answered. But this belief also raised questions, as Pol soon believed as well, that enemies in the beyond could force a discarnate to reincarnate. And the opposition included supposed ancient beings who had been reborn many times, which seems to go against the whole paradigm of why reincarnation is claimed to exist. While the group worked these issues, this mysterious 6th member of the group remained unfound over the years, and the promised avenues of advancement dried up, leaving the guides with a poor reputation in the group. Pole did put together the resources for another trip to Constantinople on the quest in April, which investigated the seaside entrance to a possible hidden library, but returned home unsuccessful by the end of May. Through these Russian exiles, from 1922, Pole began an appeal on behalf of the Russian clergy in the face of Bolshevist opposition of the Soviets, and continued for 12 years. In 1925, he visited Bath. He set up an important import-export business, but seemed to succeed more connecting with people in all kinds of walks of life and trying to resolve problems, but was not an economic success. Personally, the stress of these setbacks and perhaps an illness made him bedridden with a paralyzing condition in later 1923. His economic situation was reduced to surviving by wits instead of returns from investments, and occasionally borrowing money from friends by spring of 1924. The quest was put on hold. Then things began to turn around. There was an Algerian paper investment in later 1924, and in 1925 he entered into business in Italy, which then became a successful land management company across a wide area around Gargano, Italy. There he also visited the sanctuary of Mont St. Angelo, which was associated with Archangel Michael and Roman Catholic Padre Pio, the stigmatist, and was under the threat of malaria. There he worked with, among others, Mussolini in his early days. Pole's father died in late summer 1926. Pole's father died in late summer 1926. In December, Pole spoke to a spiritualist group in London and to another group the next year in March. New era of projects and the Silent Minute. In time, Pole tried to advance 3 centers of spiritual importance across Britain and Ireland: Glastonbury, associated with the Arthurian legend and early Christianity in Britain; Scottish Iona; and an as yet uncertain island of Ireland. These 3 would be a heart to be in the relation to the brains of London, Edinburgh, and Dublin. The cup was taken to Glastonbury and Iona. At time, Pole and Goodchild and others maintained links with people in the Golden Dawn group and a chance to lead a particular subgroup which didn't come about. Indeed, a triad of centers of Baha'i development did form in the early days of the religion in Britain. In 1928, Pole undertook going to pilgrimage sites for St. Michael in Europe following interest in Rudolf Steiner, connecting Glastonbury and Tintagel. In 1930, Pole was in a business meeting. Some of his Russian contacts themselves developed problems with the Russian clergy from 1930. In 1931, Pole's quest involved some archaeology activity, but was not successful. The published biography of Pole largely ends coverage in 1931, so the summarization of Pole's visions and experiences currently ends, and the available coverage shifts to more of his public engagement in works. In 1933, Pole was still visible on behalf of the situation of the Russian clergy, and again in 1935, and in his own words in 1936 with the struggles of what life was like in Russia instead of the propaganda. That year, he also founded the company Wellesley Holdings 1936 for waste conversion, which was and sold in the 1940s. In 1937, he published On the Shadow Doctor he felt had been assisting him for years. Rejuvenated connections with Baha'is. In 1938, Pole was included in efforts of incorporation of National Spiritual Assembly of Great Britain, the national institution managing the community, and felt free to associate and support Baha'is in the 1940s. Pole is next found in newspapers in 1940 with the beginning of the promulgation of the Silent Mute, and co-wrote The Spiritual Front, an issue each of us must face fairly and squarely, with Waldron Smithers. Pole began a consideration of what became called the Silent Mute from 1917, and its success was mentioned by a Nazi official in 1945. Is there power in prayer? Sir, an illustration of the efficacy of prayer in relation to the weather is seen in the miraculous deliverance of the British Army at Dunkirk in 1940. Into a salient 15 miles wide and 10 miles wide deep, there were trapped 250,000 British troops and a French army of 100,000, a short length of seacoast around Dunkirk being the only outlet. As soon as Lord Gort notified the War Office of the extreme gravity of the situation, King George VI called upon his people to observe Sunday, May 26, 1940, as a national day of prayer. Mr. W. Tudor Pole gives this vivid description of what happened. The events which followed the day of prayer have now become history, and in retrospect can only be regarded as of an unprecedented character. When the dikes were opened to flood the low ground to delay the German advance, the wind blew in from the sea, greatly facilitating this important operation. During 5 out of the 7 days and nights of the evacuation period, the wind blew from the land, without which embarkation in small boats from that dangerous coast would have proved impossible. The sea became calm, a rare occurrence in these waters. Mist came down and hit our men lying on those unprotected beaches, and a dense pall of smoke from burning Dunkirk and an unexpected and unseasonable spell of wet weather proved invaluable allies. Between May 29th and June 4th, 225,000 British officers and men and 112,000 French and Belgian soldiers were brought safely away. The country's prayers had been heard. Soon after the end of the war in 1945, a British intelligence officer, whilst questioning high Nazi officials, asked one of them why he thought Germany had lost the war. He thought deeply and said, "During the war, you had a secret weapon for which we could find no countermeasure and which we did not understand, but it was very powerful. It was associated with the striking of Big Ben at 9 p.m. each day. I believe you called it the Silent Minute." And its successors, so some of that movement went on to become the Lamplighter movement, none of which was commented by Baha'is. The call for the Silent Minute expanded and continued, and he toured giving talks too. Pole had been present at the centenary celebrations of Baha'is in London in 1944, though still stressing his view that it was a movement versus a separate religion following reconnection that Shoghi Effendi advised in 1943, though Pole's connection with 2 early regional leaders in Zionist growth of Palestine did not bother Shoghi Effendi. Baha'is were somewhat visible in the newspapers that spring and a little in the fall, while Pole was visible in the Pall with the restyled wording of the Big Ben Minute for the Silent Minute, and with an offer to seek to repair the Liberty Bell, which did not get received well. In 1945, Pole maintained contact with the Baha'is, and who appeared to accept his position as assist the cause as a non-member, while Pole continued publicly engaged in the Silent Minute, Big Ben Minute work even after the war. Pole was on the RMS Queen Elizabeth when it berthed in America in April 1947, but did not disembark. The paperwork listed him as a first-class passenger and as an industrialist born in Somerset. Also, a passenger was not listed. Also, a passport was not listed. He set up an alternative healthcare services and pharmacy business in 1948. The final known mention from Shoghi Effendi came in 1949 when he advised the Baha'is in Britain invite Pol to their events in schools and show utmost consideration of him. In 1950 through 51, Pol wrote 2 articles mentioning the Baha'i faith in an attempt at a scholarly psychic investigations journal. In the first, he states, "The primary mission of the Baha'i faith is to enable every adherent of an earlier world faith to obtain a fuller understanding of the religion with which he stands identified and to acquire a clear apprehension of its purpose, which, in our modern world, will involve the emergence of a world community, the consciousness of world citizenship, and the founding of a universal civilization and culture. This revelation is now beginning to demonstrate its right to be recognized not as one more religious system added to the conflicting creeds which for so many generations have divided mankind, but rather as a restatement of the eternal verities underlying all the religions of the past, as a unifying force instilling into the adherents of these religions a new spiritual vigor, and unfolding to their eyes the glorious destiny that awaits the human race." This kind of is crazy because, not just to like insert myself here, but I had gotten some of these books like the Kitab-i-Iqan and the Tablets of Baha'u'llah, and then eventually the Kitab-i-Aqdas, going back to I think it was March 14th through March 21st of last year is when, or no wait, was it this year? Yeah, this year, that I got these books. But if you, as I mentioned in post 86, March 14th and March 21st were kind of like just weird days for me that I think like a shift happened, an alignment of some sort. And those books and reading about them and seeing what their underlying message is, which is kind of what he just said, I don't want to say it gave me like a strength, but it gave me like this, I don't know, like just a recalibration of all the things that I've done so far, which can kind of be confusing and you can kind of forget like the goal. And I don't know, it just gave me some sort of motivation. Both parts of this are close paraphrases of Shoghi Effendi's statements. First, in the World Order of Baha'u'llah, written in 1932, it's declared its primary purpose is to enable every adherent of these faiths to obtain a fuller understanding of the religion with which he stands identified and to acquire a clearer apprehension of its purpose. And second, in a statement to the UN in 1947, this faith has now increasingly demonstrated its right to be recognized, not as one more religious system superimposed on the conflicting creeds which for so many generations have divided mankind and darkened its fortunes, but rather as a restatement of the eternal verities underlying all the religions of the past, as a unifying force instilling into the adherents of these religions a new spiritual vigor, infusing them with a new hope and love for mankind, firing them with a new vision of the fundamental unity of their religious doctrines, and unfolding to their eyes the glorious destiny that awaits the human race. Pol further comments that the pictures of Baha'u'llah give a very poor impression of the stature and dignity of this great being, and felt much the same about Abdul Baha, though he carried a picture of him on his person every day. Of Abdul Baha, he said, "One would instinctively refer to a sense of universalism permeated with the spirit of deep, loving kindness. Whatever the topic under discussion might be, ranging from religion to the weather, from sunsets to flowers, from ethics to personality, Abdul Baha always struck the universal note, the note of oneness as between the Creator and all his creation, great or small." In the second article he wrote, recalled the anecdotes of being sent to Paris in some details, though also that the details are from long ago memories and might have errors. I don't know. Maybe I should read that. Okay, so in 1951, Pohl co-wrote Prince of Heaven, Captain of the Angelic Hosts, about St. Michael. This was also the year his wife, Florence, died shortly before they moved to Hurstpierpoint, Sussex. Pohl was still identified with the Big Ben Minute in 1951 and in diplomatic circles in 1953. In 1954, his son David began to be mentioned, as well as Pohl's support for the stances of President Eisenhower and the work of Pohl in the Big Ben Council and its observance the next years. By around then, and probably earlier period, Pohl joined the Fairy Investigation Society, a semi-secret occult group devoted to collecting evidence and information about the existence of fairies and to organize documented instances of fairy sightings. A semi-secret occult group devoted to collecting evidence and information about the existence of fairies, as well as to organize documented instances of fairy sightings. I didn't know it went on to say that, but one of Pohl's books, The Silent Road, was published in 1960. Later decades involvements. In 1958 through 59, Pohl and a group of investors bought the Tor School in previously Chalice Well lands, established by Alice Buckton in 1913, as a replacement and migration of the enthusiasm of original Bride's Well with a substitute well. Buckton had died in 1944, but her inheritors could not sustain the establishment. Pohl recast the investment as a trust with support by subscribers termed companions to allow visitors free access, to further the aims of claiming Christianity in Britain was based on Joseph of Arimathea coming to the island and his own feeling close to monastic Roman Catholic orders. The process of this new founding made news starting in 1958. Meanwhile, mention of his belief in prayer and war was called to mind in 1962, as well as the comment of a Nazi official. In 1965, he wrote A Man Seen Afar with the assistance of Rosamond Lehman, about the life of Jesus Christ through his visionary experience, and still trying to make sure Winston Churchill was being remembered for the Silent Minute. In 1966, work relative to the Chalice Well was more in the news. Though it took years, Writing on the Ground was published, responding to requests from Baha'is and remembered Abdul-Baha, and continuing to underscore Pohl's claim that Abdul-Baha had envisioned it as a movement and not a religion, as one's own commitment to the spiritual path. It was published in 1968. Pohl and comments about Pohl were in the news in 1968 and 1969. In these last years of his life, Pohl came to a metaphorical understanding of the cup. Half a century ago, in the woman's quarter of Glastonbury, from the depths of the well of St. Bride, a cup was brought out into the light of day. This vessel is the symbol of the heavenly and eternal grail, the chalice of Christ, the promise of the future. Pohl died September 13th, 1968, and suffered from cancer and often in pain at his home in Hurstpierpoint, Sussex. Pohl was cremated and his ashes dispersed at a garden of the Chalice Well in Glastonbury. So, review and legacy. I've never heard of this guy until I was researching this, and that's why I felt like I needed to go over all of that. Pohl has been seen in a number of contexts. For one, he is seen as a progenitor of the New Age development as one of the contingent collectivities and emblems which congealed more in the later 1960s with and after Pohl's death, as well as being part of the Celtic revival, theosophy, and esotericism of Glastonbury. And in general, the theme of Irish Celticism and Pohl's work in it has been explored as a decolonization theme out of a Catholic-Protestant dynamic, which then was influenced by Indian philosophy and theosophy, and origin stories of the Irish people, though the specific ideas of these varied from Pohl's own. Tudor Pohl considered himself a universalist belonging to the schools of mysteries, conversant with the tenets of the world's philosophies and religions. Tudor Pole and his immediate associates felt they had inaugurated the Church of the New Age, a church in which woman was in the ascent and bride. The Celtic embodiment of the universal feminine was restored and harmonized with a mystical understanding of the Christian faith. He has been described as a bricoleur, creating new forms from older ideas. Clearly, he had a relationship with the Baha'i faith. He has been seen as central to one of the three initial networks of contacts amounting to communities for the Baha'i faith in the UK, London, the Celtic mysticism of Pole and others, and the Manchester groups. Pole's grandson William is a recognized Baha'i. Pole had a long career in applying spiritualism on Christianity and consistent held priority of Jesus. It is unclear when or if in multiple conversations, but Pole also remarked that he had shared with Abdul-Baha that he understood Jesus to have manifested the Christ principle more than any other person, and he felt encouraged by Abdul-Baha to not give up on the Christian community, but to strive to bring Baha'i principles to it as given by Baha'u'llah. It was made clear that the Baha'i revelation had dawned to bring new light and truth into the world as a leaven for all faiths and all mankind, and was not to be considered as just one more religious organization or sect. However, Pole maintained a Christian-centric sense of priority, or a Christian-centricness sense of priority. Pole visions had been widely accepted, generally partly because he was seen as sincere with integrity and also consistently normal rather than putting on airs, and sometimes provided enough detail about visions related to friends that they were convinced by the details. Pole lacked recognition of the Baha'i appreciation of Muhammad, the Bab, and the claims of Baha'u'llah, and had a fundamental misunderstanding about the station of Abdul-Baha as Baha'is. So he had a different understanding than the Baha'is themselves. Lil Osborne says he discovered the Baha'i teachings through his quest, not the other way around. Pole held that Abdul-Baha had opposed development of a new religion, but refused to take part in any criticism of the institutions of the religion. Writer Patrick Benham takes it further, stating Baha'u'llah taught not a new religion, but the initiation of a force to unify existing belief systems, pointing to the divine origin of every faith. Pole was a trusted senior in the area where Shodi Effendi was in London, and held in high esteem among Baha'is in UK and Haifa. However, this process of distinguishing the Baha'is as a religion was not a matter of secret teaching of Abdul-Baha, as was common in other institutions of mystics, a kind of practice Pole was aware of among them. Pole considered himself as a trusted insider who would know of any secret teaching. Instead, Baha'is see this as just the application of the principle of gradualism and not dictating belief in Pole's case. During his lifetime, Baha'is did not have to give up membership in other churches, and Abdul-Baha himself regularly attended local mosque services in Palestine. Yet about 1940, another Baha'i, Tara Cowart Smith, was questioned by Rabbi Stephen Samuel Wise, who felt he knew Abdul-Baha well, asking why in the early days Baha'is didn't give up such affiliations, and that changed. She reviewed the history of religious institutions. Each dispensation requires a new agency to establish its separate and independent character, so we wouldn't expect that in the new Baha'i era any of the former agencies could serve this major function. For God's purpose for the time in which we live is the establishment of unity of all people of the world. In Baha'i devotional services, the scriptures of all the world's religions have a part. Baha'is institutions have recognized Paul's specific contribution to the rescue of Abdul-Baha. Paul's part in his visit to Britain both times has also been the object of some note among Baha'is, and Paul's main biographer and a documented correspondent have seen it as the fulfillment of one of Paul's own prophecies. Baha'i is mentioned in his book Writing on the Ground in 1969 and have collected Baha'i's mentions of his online. In succeeding decades, Paul's views and writings have appeared and reappeared in newspapers, the social media of the day. In 2009, a series of articles of his works were republished in Canada through his foundation. More materials and references have appeared on the internet. Among Paul's greater achievements late in life was the rescue of the Chalice Well in Glastonbury near a decade before his passing, and though he never lived in the town. This must be like OCR stand from a book, clearly. The Glastonbury Cup itself came there in 1969, only after Pole died. A grandson, Edward Tudor Pole, is an English musician, television presenter, and actor. Another grandson, Edward Tudor Pole, had been advancing a musician trust in Glastonbury since the mid-1990s. Another grandson, Edward Tudor Pole, had been advancing a musician trust in Glastonbury since the 1990s. That's not even what I wanted to get into, but as much as he's talking about the Grail, and again, it really goes back to what I was really talking about the Vesica. And anyway, here's a Vesica on this well cover, and then a Vesica in these in the pool. Going back to Ta'aret or Ta'ert, Tuart, protective goddess of childbirth and fertility, she who is great, simply great one. She commonly bears the epithets Lady of Heaven, Mistress of Pure Water, Lady of the Birth House. And this whole thing made me think of like the connection, I guess, between Mary as the Virgin. If you look up the Egyptian equivalent to Virgo, it's Mayut or Mut, the mother goddess associated with Nu or Nuit. Mut was sometimes said to have given birth to the world through parthenogenesis. Virgo is in Greek called Parthenos. And the Greek version would be Astrea, which relates to the stars. I don't know, like I'm trying to just like understand what this symbolizes, I guess, and why, like, it's very confusing. It's easy to get confused with no context. What's funny is if you look at here, she who listens to the one who calls her, makes me think of Guan Yin. Guan Yin, Canaan, relates to Mary also, because Guan Yin or Canaan hears the cries, the divine child on her lap. I don't know. I'm not trying to like say that they're all the same. I just find these overlaps and connections interesting. In Greek myth, Astrea lived together with humans on Earth during the idealistic Golden Age when people were virtuous and no evil existed in the world. The equivalent to Virgo, though, is the hermit. Kanya, Naga Kanya, comes to mind. Who's like a mermaid, gives the wisdom to Nagarjuna. Mermaids and Mary have a connection. Mermaids and Mary. The etymology of mermaid. Fabled marine or amphibian creature having the upper body in the form of a woman and the lower in the form of a fish. Maid itself, the maiden, which is Virgo, the virgin. Mer being the sea. So that itself, like the word marry too in marriage kind of relates as well. Corruption of the name of the Virgin Mary. It made me think and wonder if there is a connection with Marici. Marici, ray of light, Buddhist deity. So like there's this another similarity in that generally it's Marici is mostly a goddess, but sometimes a mind-born sun. Again, relating to the mind. But also a celestial woman. Marici refers to the rays of the sun. Also refers to a mirage. And that relates Māyā and Marici, which here in this website's not loading properly, but the PDF, the king of ritual manuals from the Tantra of Māyā Marici's arising. Māyā is also the name of the mother of Buddha. And it's very much about protection. And it's just funny, like the cord of protection I found. Hold on. The cord of protection is 888. Increase wealth, increase one's intelligence, free oneself or protect oneself from perilous situations. I want to get into this because it hadn't, like I've known of it, but I was waiting for a good time, I guess, and soon will be, I guess, the time to get into it more. But I didn't realize how much the Sarva Durgati Parisodhana Tantra, which is of Ushnisha Vijaya, how profound that was. And so it causes me to want to take this a little more serious. But what I was going to say is, like, obviously I don't want to try to link things that aren't, but apparently other people have also wondered, upon her discovery by the Western world, colonial era writers such as Georgi conjectured on phonetic grounds that she might have been copied from or inspired by the Christian concept of the Virgin Mary. However, this conjecture was rejected following the discoveries of numerous older artworks and texts. So obviously, just because it's older doesn't mean there's not some similar, like picking up on the same vibe or whatever you want to call it. But the fact that she's associated or thought to have originated from the Vedic goddess Ushas, the goddess of dawn, just being Mary being associated with the morning star. Yes, Mary is profoundly associated with the dawn in Christian theology and tradition. Her birth is described as the dawn of our salvation, etc. So, and the Ushas, I've probably already mentioned, but is 777, mother with a tau, and child, 777, etc. I mean, but, and then I found out about this circle of stars, which I actually saw in the back of a car recently in my neighborhood, but it's related to Council of Europe, 1949. Again, going back, 1948 was Israel. It's also called the Crown of Immortality. The Crown of Immortality is a separate and earlier motif and metaphor which also uses a circle of stars. It has been widely used since the early church as a metaphor for the reward awaiting martyrs. But they are not depicted in art wearing a circle of stars. In art, the use is mainly in Baroque allegorical compositions and those with Ariadne. Obviously, primarily associated with Mary. This just made me think back to how, when I was talking about the triangle UFO, TR3B, whatever you want to call it, post 82, I was thinking of how I had mentioned, like, and calculated Immaculate Constellation, which is like a play on Immaculate Conception, which was released, like, the information about was, or the mentioning of was mentioned just last year. But then come to find out, like, they knew 3i Atlas, or they had found it in like as far back as 2005, probably with Immaculate Constellation. But I thought it was weird. IMMACULAT CONSTLLATION. Immaculate Constellation is 552. Just applying Hebrew to English. And then I realized, like, I didn't really want to mention it in the last post, but 3i Atlas, like, it had certain, the Fibonacci thing was weird. Couldn't find 3i Atlas spelled out as 114. You add Immaculate Constellation, it's yet another 666. And again, like, I've probably thrown out 100 at least in this post. But that one alone, I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, what the are the aliens Hebrew? These are those things that it's just like, okay, well, even if I was just I wasn't trying to find that, I just found it. This book, the Book of Earths, it came up when I was like really with the help of my gematria database, but the fact it talks a lot about the sky and then its separation from really the waters, which again, mem is 90, sky is 90, mem, sky. This book talks a lot about those two things. I'm not going to go fully into it, but it reminded me of Commons Beaumont, and one of the last books, like, I really wanted to try to find eventually, but I want to get it reasonable, is The Mysterious Comet, or The Origin, Building Up, and Destruction of Worlds by Means of Cometary Contacts, 1932. He's got all these other books too, and he was controversial and would probably be more so now. It says, in Facts and Fallacies, published by Reader's Digest, Beaumont's views are summarized. In a series of books published between 1946 and 1949, British journalist Williams Commons Beaumont, which is where Kenneth Grant, he references the Beaumont Club in the Ninth Arch, which was like a place they would get together at some bar or something, I think like a pub, and discuss like weird theories, kind of like people do now on forums, but it was just back in the day. Astonished the world with the following extraordinary revelations. Jesus of Nazareth had been crucified just outside Edinburgh, Scotland, the site of the ancient city of Jerusalem. Satan was a comet that collided with the earth and caused Noah's flood. The ancient Egyptians were in fact Irishmen. Hell is to be found in West Scotland. The Greek hero Achilles spent his childhood on the Isle of Skye. Galilee, birthplace of Jesus, was Wales. Ancient Athens was in reality Bath, England. Commons Beaumont started his radical revision of history with the belief, innocuous enough, that the lost island of Atlantis might be Britain. So again, that goes back with, again, the green stone I mentioned, because that was some of the theories like mentioned in that, which it sounds ridiculous, but when considering the Ninth Arch and the sort of replaying of certain patterns, you could call it reincarnation, but I don't know if it's necessarily that or if it's, I don't know, there's a lot more to like generalizing repetitive doppelganger sort of situations, whatever you want to call it. That's how I look at it. I don't see it's like, oh, this is what happened, but if you I don't know how to explain it. Just the way mythology itself repeats in people's lives, does that mean that they are reincarnations, or does that mean, no, it's just like patterns repeat. Anyway, not that I'm giving credence to what any of this is saying. I'm just saying, like, that's what comes up when I read about that, the conflation. But yeah, he's a proponent of the Shakespeare authorship question, arguing Shakespeare's plays were written by Francis Bacon. Um, I think this is a very way too like much of a smashing together of maybe some of the, I wouldn't even say conclusions, but questions that come up when he was analyzing some of these stuff, because these the history and all that. And when you really do, like, when you sit and look at some of these things, again, the way that people try to, like, they'll be like, well, this didn't happen. Marici exists longer than Mary. Well, it's like, okay, but the similarities don't, I don't know. I don't know how to frame what I'm saying better, because it's like in trying to, I get confused myself. But all I'm saying is it's interesting when you find old shit that kind of like, you're like, hey, wait, that might be a key to understanding whatever we like. We'll put like a lid of what we think or what they say. I say they, but like authorities on a topic, because they concluded something, but later information or present information then didn't uncover or expose or show, give insight to the fuller story. And later we can look back and be like, huh, maybe their interpretation was a reaction with too little information. I don't know. I don't know how to explain this, what I'm thinking, because it's too many things going in different ways that I don't even want to explore right now. But this book's interesting because of how deep it goes into these different views of the world of different people. It even mentions the Tree of Life and the Kabbalah, the Lost Atlantis. One interesting fact I just want to point out real quick is how it says that this is the ritual manual of the Dhāraṇī of the goddess Mārici that was received by Vairocana's great king. Visualize Marici on a sun and moon disk. Imagine a needle and thread emerging before her out of her rays, and so shut the mouths and eyes of wicked beings. Set up a boundary to any external observation and imagine, while reciting the was dwelling in Sravasti line, that the goddess Marici emerges in her complete form from the light of the sun and moon. Continue saying, there is a certain goddess named Marici, the victor said, who arrives just before the sun and moon, but even the many hordes of gods cannot see her. Then continue to where it says, may I too not be seen, and so forth. And going with the sun, moon, and I guess star, the New Testament book of Revelation describes the woman of the apocalypse, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars, and she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God into his throne. In Catholic tradition, she has been identified with the Blessed Virgin Mary, especially in connection with the Immaculate Conception. So it just seems like very closely allied. But again, so going back really to like this situation of Adam and Eve, the fall, the wrong of the beginning, the mystery of Golgotha, seems to be a sequence regarding that, I guess. Like a, what is it? I'm trying to, I don't know what I'm supposed to get from all this other than just a big implosion of synchronicity. Joseph, apparently, supposedly, at least according to some accounts, supposed to be 90 years old. Although could have also been 111. Anyway, I keep saying I don't know. There's just something interesting about all this, like all these different religions, even Islam, apparently finds Mary important. And of course, the scientific approach would consider this all bullshit. And it's not like I believe it necessarily. It's just there's definitely something weird to humanity and Earth. In Dzogchen, Ozer Chenma is particularly important in Nyingma schools of Dzogchen. Her importance is due to the symbolism of the sun and its rays for Dzogchen thought, as well as the use of the sun as an aid in the Dzogchen practice of Thogal, crossing or surpassing the skull. The self-arisen Vidya Tantra states, in order to demonstrate the source of light rays, there is a tantra known as the Māyīcī Tantra. In this tradition, her main seed syllable is Mum, and her mantra is Om Mary Zeye Mum Svaha.